not the ministry side of it. Let's just understand the culture side of it, because I think that is super important. If we don't understand the culture that we're in, what even is the point? Anytime I'm talking to somebody about what I do, I make sure to start with the fact that we are actually nerds. I think that's really important. A lot of times, Christians come into spaces and we drop VBSs in foreign countries that work in America that might not work in their space. And then we wonder why it just kind of dies when we leave. They really look forward to us coming back, but there's no sustainability when we're gone. So what we're trying to do is to say, hey, we are actually in this space. Each and every one of us loves something different. You might be into Dungeons and Dragons, or you might be into Magic the Gathering, or Baldur's Gate 3, or whatever your nerdy thing is. There may be something that you just absolutely love, and we want to help you understand you can do that with the cause of Christ in mind. And you should. So let's step back, and I'm just going to skip across the top of the cultural timeline here. And we're going to talk about some things. I might talk about the thing that's your area. I might not talk about the thing that's your area. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just the one that I've got. Dungeons and Dragons, all right? How many people play Dungeons and Dragons in here? Look at all these nerds. Just every last one of them. I often will tell people D&D it's not my thing. It's not for me. I have capacity for about 2 campaigns a year. One-shots. I have 2 one-shots a year. I have that capacity. And even then, I'm not even in character. I'm just watching everybody else around me. It's like an experience, like VR kind of for me. But Dungeons and Dragons, it comes onto the scene in 1974. All right? I'm going to give you guys a lot of dates and numbers and stuff, and I'm not putting them on the screen because I don't really want you to remember those. I just want us to live in this moment here. Comes on the scene in 1974. By 1977, it began to pick up steam as they released the advanced D&D rules. 1997, Wizards of the Coast, God bless them, Wizards of the Coast picked them up. In 2014, the 5e rules were released, and so since 2014, we've all lived in a better Dungeons & Dragons universe, which thank you for that. It used to be wild. I've heard about what it was like when 1e and 2e were it's the Wild West. In 2017, 9 million people watched other people play Dungeons & Dragons online. Thank you, Critical Role. All right? D&D finally reaches its all-time height in popularity thanks to the television show Stranger Things. And I would say if you're in this room and you haven't watched Stranger Things, there might be a couple of reasons why you haven't. If you were able to, I think that it is required watching for a nerd culture ministry. Teaches you a lot. How about Magic the Gathering? How many MTGers we got in here? Planeswalkers, yeah. So that was designed in 1991. Some of you may not know this because of Dungeons and Dragons. It was the openness, the open-ended but dreadfully written D&D rule set led to the creation of Magic the Gathering. Okay, it was also picked up by our good friends Wizards of the Coast in 1993, and they averaged by 2022 they averaged about $1 billion annually in sales. From most of you in this room, I'm sure. Absolutely. And I mean, so many other things coming out of Magic the Gathering. You've got the whoops in the room. You've got a lot of things that come from Magic the Gathering. You have video games. You've got a lot of extra worlds that have been created out of that. Speaking of video games, this is probably the biggest and widely known part of nerd culture. It may not be the largest, per capita. There are a lot of people that play D&D in their basements and just never talk about it, but a lot of people will tell you about the game that they're playing, okay? The video game. So let's take a trip down memory lane for video games. In 1972, Pong was first commercially released as a video game, and it was the first actual success commercially of video games. It wasn't the first one. You got to go way back to get that one, but it was the first commercial success. The industry then crashed in 1983 due to the issue of quantity over quality. Yeah, looking at you, E.T. And so, but then in 1985, Nintendo steps up and just saves everybody's bacon. Single-handedly saves the video game industry with the release of the NES. Okay? And that was a big deal because that led to a lot of extra stuff as well. As of 2020, here are some interesting figures. The video game industry boasts revenues over $159 billion with a B. You're going to figure out just how big that number is in 1 second. I promise you that. But here's something that I think is even more remarkable than the revenue number is that 48% of the video game numbers is mobile. In the US, we don't understand that at all. You get outside of the US, it's a lot of mobile. It's a lot of mobile, right, Jamie? Like, we're talking to our guys in Brazil all the time, and they're like, just, why do you guys have anything but a phone? You know, everybody's playing on their phones. So 48% of the world's video game population plays on mobile. Might be something for us to think about. As of 2024, the video game industry's revenue is estimated to be as high as $455 billion. That's a pretty big jump from the previous number I just gave you of, what was it, 159 to 455? Let's understand how big that number is, okay? Because this is going to tell us kind of where culture is and where it's going. The music industry, as of 2023, $28.6 billion. Okay, we knew that number was going to dip with the advent of streaming music and all that stuff, okay? How about the cinema industry, movies? As of 2024, an estimated $79.2 billion. The television industry, okay? This one's the largest one. As of 2021, that was about $210 billion. And Netflix, which I think is just an interesting one to throw into this because it takes so much of our culture with it, $9.8 billion. If you combine all of those numbers, you come up with $327.6 billion annually in revenue. That is still $127.4 billion less than the video game industry. All of those combined. I could add more to that list, and it still wouldn't reach. $127.4 billion is a big number in and of itself. And that's just the gap between everything else that culture is telling us is the thing. Friends, Taylor Swift is in that music number. Right? That's kind of a big deal, okay? So, I mean, we're doing things in a space that is easily the largest space of any of the recreational cultural spaces that exist. The video game space specifically. Esports made its way onto the Olympic picture, in 2020, largely due to the pandemic. But we've seen a rise in things like the Olympic Esports Series, which took place just last year. And in 2023. And what they did was they actually handed out bronze, silver, and gold trophies to winners in categories like dance and shooting and all sorts of things. But these things were, I got them right here, Fortnite, Gran Turismo 7, and Just Dance, as well as virtual chess. On the Olympic stage. It's kind of okay to laugh at that, if I'm being real. Like, I have a hard time seeing chess as an Olympic sport myself, but even in that moment, I've got to check that against where culture is actually going. The Olympics, as an entity, has grown since its inception to what it is now. If they saw people, throwing darts as an Olympic sport, they would roll over in their graves. But here we are, doing a lot of things that we didn't set out to do, because that's where culture is going. So it's important for us to know that some of the largest entities in the world are actually moving into the esports and video game space. Number one, chief amongst them being Saudi Arabia. Okay, Riyadh is going to be hosting the Esports World Cup, basically from here until you are not on this planet anymore. They're just taking it over. They're rebuilding entire cities so that they can have esports events there. Jamie, you're going out there, right? You're going to go check this thing out? Yeah, going to try to. And so, it's an interesting time to be alive, where it's not just us sitting in corners of basements or dimly lit rooms. It's people on the grandest stages in the world saying, we're going to throw everything into this. Everything. Like big money into this space. And that's just, friends, that's just video games. Let's talk about anime. Anybody like anime in here? Woo-woo! Yeah. Anime is another area where I'm trying really hard to get into it, okay? Like, every time I step into it, I'm like, I just don't even know where to start. Like, and they're like, oh, just start at the beginning of this 12-year, series, kind of a deal. And I'm like, well, I got things to do, right? Like, I got to watch my kids grow up sometime. And so, but let's talk a little bit about anime, because anime is one of those things that is sweeping not just the nation, but the absolute world. We were in Paris not too long ago, and the culture in Paris is very, very anime. Like, it's taking over a lot of things across the city. And that's not a place where I would think in my brain that I would find that. But it's all over the place. So let's take a little trip down memory lane. So anime, or Japanese animation, dates all the way back to the very early 1900s, okay? And it looked nothing like it looks now, at all right? It had no real style or anything. It's just a way to move into animation, early 1900s. Manga and Japanese animation then converged in the 1960s. I thought this was interesting, with Astro Boy thrusting it into popular culture. Astro Boy, of all things. I never in a million years would have put Astro Boy on that list. The 1980s saw a series like Gundam start to take root. The late 90s benefited from the bubble economy, okay? Huge, massive economic bubble there of the 80s, and gave birth to things like Ghost in the Shell, Cowboy Bebop, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, just to name a few. Like, a lot of these things that you guys have, like, bed sheets and underwear for, like, came out of this boom in the early 90s. The 90s also saw an increased, like a massive hype jump in interest in anime from the rest of the world. It started to bleed out. You got to understand the 90s. Anybody remember the 90s? Just barely, maybe like 3 of us, right? Like, it was a wild time. I mean, you had to get things imported. Like, the internet wasn't, it was just a figment of our imagination at that point. So when you got something that was from a distant land, like, it was kind of a big deal. But then how do you have one copy of it? How do you get it out to everybody? There was no, like, mass distribution channel yet. But as those things start to come in and start to get shared around, this Western audience starts to grow a little bit with it. Then we fast forward to about 2003, Spirited Away. Yeah, Studio Giblets, Studio Giblets. I've heard it both ways. I'm being real with you. So I just charged head forward into it in a room full of nerds. That was a good idea for me to do. But in 2003, that's our full-length feature anime that hits, and it's just wild success. I mean, don't take my word for it. Literally talk to anybody who actually knows anything about anime. I mean, Asia, I've heard you say it several times when people are like, oh, yeah, I'm thinking about watching anime. They're like, hey, you should watch Spirited Away. And I'm like, is that the one about the horse? I can't remember. It's not the one about the horse, just in case you're wondering. I promise it's not. But then you fast forward, you've got, in 2021, a little show called Attack on Titan was the most in-demand. This was wild. I could not believe this when I read that. It was the most in-demand show in the world. In-demand show in the world. And by 2024, Jujutsu Kaisen, did I say that correct? Yeah, Jujutsu Kaisen. It broke that record by taking that title and smashing the Attack on Titan record with an average global demand rating that was 71.2 times higher than Attack on Titan. What? That's wild. Already the top of the mountain, the most in-demand thing is an anime. Something else comes along and blows it out of the water. Now, I'll be real. I have tried to watch Attack on Titan, okay? I tried to even do it the right way, with the subs, not the dubs, okay? And I got about 1 episode in, and I was like, I don't know. I have no idea what's happening. I can't see anything that's happening on the screen. It's going too fast, and I can't read that fast. Then I turned on the dubs, and I was like, this is a subpar experience. I'm going to step out altogether. And so my hope and my goal for 2025 is to watch 1 more episode of Attack on Titan. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's the least I can do for all of you. How about the movie industry? All right, we talked about that. In 1984, this is just nerd culture stuff related, right? Movies go way back. But in 1984, Revenge of the Nerds starts to shift this cultural zeitgeist about what it means to be a nerd, right? If you remember that movie at all, it was very just nerd stuff, right? Like it was super nerd. But about 3/4 of the way through the movie, it flips. And that was weird. And then all the rest of them come out and the nerds are on top and the jocks are on bottom, and it's this cultural shift that nobody was ready for, but it kickstarted a lot of really cool things. I mean, in the 80s and mid 80s and early 90s, we get to see things like a lot of sci-fi and high fantasy and stuff like that comes out, and like movies that we might want to watch that are not just maybe like all war and gore, right? If you're into that, that's totally cool. But like some people don't want to just watch that stuff. We want a little bit of variety. We get introduced in 91 to Terminator 2, Judgment Day. And the world gets to see what it's like to be controlled by time-traveling robots. And that literally, I think, changed so much about how movies were made from then on. It introduced people to that kind of stuff even after Terminator 1 had come out and nobody had seen that movie. T2 introduced a lot of things to people. Marvel legitimately kicks things off, if we're being real. They kick off their cinematic universe in 2008. That just feels too far back, right? Like, it was just yesterday when they started and Iron Man came out. Nope, it was 2008 when that came out. And they really changed the way that people talked at work, the way they interacted with their friends, the kinds of conversations that we had in secret were now coming out in public. And we were talking about things like, well, I don't know, man, like, who could really lift Mjolnir, like in the MCU? That's a really weird thing. And then we saw Captain America have it, and everybody lost their minds, right? Like, it was just, then Vision had it, and it was just, everybody was holding it after that. But this idea that Marvel changed the landscape, it's not just what we might perceive as popular. The stats post the same thing. Did you know that 8 of the top 10, oh, the list changed. 7 of the top 10 movies of all time grossing are nerd culture movies. All time. Let's just look at them real quick. You may not like these movies, and that's totally fine, but everything still stands. Avatar, okay? Not the Airbender, the blue ones, all right? Avatar. Yeah, just so we know where we're at, all right? Avatar, that's number 1 overall. Avengers Endgame, number 2. Avatar Way of the Water, number 3. If you've not seen it, it's not as bad as you think. Just do yourself a favor, go watch it, okay? Number 4 is Titanic. Number 5, Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Again, you may not like these movies, okay? But doesn't matter. Hey, whoa, hey, this is my time, Mark. Don't start a riot here, okay? But that was, I mean, if you guys remember, that was like, hey, Star Wars is back. Like, nobody knew anything. It was the excitement of the moment. And so that's number 5. Number 6, Avengers Infinity War. Number 7, Spider-Man No Way Home. Number 8, Inside Out 2. I could make a strong case for Inside Out 2 being a nerd culture movie. Number 9, Jurassic World. And number 10, Lion King. Yeah, right? Yeah, I could make a real big case for Lion King. It's the cartoon, not the live action, just so everybody knows. Okay, yeah. But I think that we've pretty well established that nerd culture is kind of at the center of culture in general. What we have seen to be on the fringes for so long is now in the middle. But it's not always treated as if it is. But you can only push something off to the outside and the fringes for so long before what's in the middle is actually not the popular thing. And so where I'm saying we are the hub, we're at the middle, culture's pushed us to the outside. And not just us in this room, but us in every room. I mean, I frequently have conversations with people where I'm talking to them and they're like, oh, yeah, I like that thing. Like, I've known you for 10 years. How have you never, ever, ever said anything about that? Or what's even worse is when, I'm nobody to a lot of people. I walk into a room and I start having a conversation with somebody, and I'm talking about the things that I love and care about, and they're like, oh, yeah, I like that. And the person next to him, who has known them for 10 years, goes, what? When did that happen? They're like, oh, yeah, my mom made me a Michelangelo birthday cake, and it was all downhill from there. That's my story, by the way. But I think that we made a pretty strong case that there's a need for nerd culture ministry. And I'm not necessarily just saying it for you in this room, because if you're here in this room, you understand. This is a lot for the people that are going to be watching this later, to understand this. This is for you guys to share with people who don't necessarily understand, and they think it's just this cute little thing that you do when you're bored. That's not it. It's not it. This is a thing that brings so many people life and joy and passion and acceptance and understanding. And we cannot stand in the way of it and go, yeah, it's stupid though, right? Why would you spend so much time on this stupid thing? So where's nerd culture ministry right now? A lot of it's in this room. I mean, a lot of it is in this room. But not all of it. So what I want to do is I want to kind of help you guys understand some of the ministries that exist, some of the people that are out there. This is not an exhaustive list. If I do not talk about your thing, I promise you it is not because I don't think that it's worthwhile. I just only have so many minutes on the clock to talk, okay? But we want you to understand these things so that you can get involved in this stuff, things that resonate with you, things that you want to be involved with, things that nobody's going to have to motivate you to do. You're going to get out of bed in the morning and go, I got to tell somebody about this new anime. I got to have a conversation with somebody who cares about this thing. And my hope is that you'll want to have conversations with people that think differently than you do and believe differently than you do, because we're not trying to create any kind of echo chamber. It's good. It is wonderful. It is beautiful for us to have like-minded people that we talk to about the things that we love, and that's great. And when we can do this in faith environments, it's fantastic, but this can't be it. It cannot be it. If it's it, you're not in nerd culture ministry. You're probably not in ministry at all. You're in a group. And maybe that's fine. But that's not what we are encouraging and calling you out into. And I don't believe that that's what God is calling you into either. So this summit, the collective in general, is about growth in ideas, growth in partnerships and numbers and influence and all sorts of stuff. And awareness, just to understand that these things even exist in time and space. So we want to encourage you to do that. The easiest one for me to start with is Love Thy Nerd. That's our organization. And yeah, thank you, Whoops. Whoops in the chat, yep. And so I don't want to hover here too long, which would be very easy for me to do. Very easy. For any of us that lead organizations to just get up here and tell you about all the wonderful and great things that we do as an organization. But I want to brag on some other ones. I just want to let you know that we as an organization do 3 major things. We focus in these areas: thoughtful content, relational outreach, and intentional community. The top 3 ways that we do that, thoughtful content, is our website. It's got podcasts. I mean, thousands of hours worth of things for you to get lost in. I've not even consumed all of it. It's out there. Relational outreach, we go on mission trips. We're going to have a round table tomorrow. I want you, if you're interested in missions at all, to sit down with Luke and talk to him about what it looks like to be on mission in nerd culture spaces. And then intentional communities, which is what you all are probably the most familiar with everybody, which is just, hey, how do I sit down and actually talk to somebody who does or doesn't believe the same things that I do, but we have common interests. We may be wide apart on other things, but man, we can sit down and talk to other people about, Agatha all along, right? Whatever the thing is, we can sit down and talk about those things. So, let's talk about a couple other things. Lux Digital Church. Mark was up here as MC. You'll see him a lot more. They are a digital church. It's in the title, so that's how I know it's true, right? They're an online. I say only. Are we doing only or primarily? Where do you want to land on that? I'm gonna say only. You're not up here. Lux Digital Church. Yeah, big banner right over there. And they utilize Twitch on Wednesdays for their services. And they also utilize Discord for the continued fellowship in between, after, during, all sorts of things. They're also active in mission work both inside and outside of digital spaces, which I think is fantastic, and you'll hear more about that later. They've got a killer D&D ministry. Oh my gosh, it's so good. It's a shared world. It's so good, LTN stole it. Like, we just took it. And you should steal it too. It's fantastic. They're pioneers in this space and others in just creating these learning environments like NCMS. They're not a digital campus. They are a digital church. And I think some people that are watching this later might need to hear that. That's not what we seek to create, is just digital campuses of these physical spaces. There are a lot of people that will never go to a physical church. Some of them will, but most of them won't. And they need spaces in the digital that are geared towards them. So if you come to the Lux service, you'll see that. You'll see that it's very digital focused. Even though you're sitting here, they could not care any less that you're here. It's about the people that are watching online. And that's their aim. So Mark and anybody else from their team would love to talk to you more about that. How about XP Church, or as I like to call them, the artist formerly known as God Squad. It just recently had a name change, which I think is sweet, dude. Like, I haven't had a chance to tell you yet. I think it's awesome. I think you're absolutely right. It speaks more to the culture and the people that you're trying to reach, and it talks about not staying still, but about growing, because you want to gain XP, right? Like, that's the whole point. So, I mean, Pastor Susie and Amanda are doing a fantastic job out there. They started with God Squad as the first ever church for nerds. You're welcome. Like, I don't know where else to go from that. A lot of the stuff that we have in the space comes from ideas and moments just like that. And so, Matt, thanks, man. You and Amanda, appreciate you guys. Yeah. Their vibrant community has met in person and online. They were in person for quite a while. And they also do, squad cons. I don't know what you're going to call them now. Yeah. More on that later. Stay tuned. But they also have true and authentic salvations and baptisms in physical and digital space that are happening. All these digital churches are doing that, and it's wild. They've got Discord. They've got small groups. They've got 2 services that happen on a Saturday. That if you're just puttering around on the internet on a Saturday and you need something to do, XP Church. Check them out. And Matt would love to talk to you more about that, about everything XP Church. How about Geek Center Grace, man? Where you at, Cody? There he is, right there. Yeah, they do just like faith-based reviews on pop culture things. It doesn't have to be more difficult than that sometimes, right? Like, that's what they do, and they're really good at it. And they're working on what the next stage of it looks like for them, for Geek Center Grace. And so I think that encourage them, talk with him if you want to be more about that. If you're constantly reviewing stuff, Cody's your guy. Beneath the Tangles, over here. I mean, like, that, it's just absolutely amazing the stuff that they're doing in the anime space. And in that, Jesus Otaku as well. There it is, in the back, yeah. And so, like, I mean, there are tons of people that are moving in the different spaces that you are like, man, it'd be really good if we had something that was this. It's already there. It's already there. We got things like Go Game with my guy Jamie over here. Go Game is a global gaming and esports movement. When I'm like, hey, you going to Riyadh? Like, that's a normal question to ask Jamie. Where in the world are you going to be next week, right? After this, he's going to Orlando. And then after that, probably the moon. Who knows? Yeah. Sky's the limit. And so that's a global thing. He also does satellite gaming, which is a really cool thing that shows kids that they can learn and play and have fun in these environments. And it's faith-based. And he's so good at it, schools and baseball teams are inviting him and his organization to come out and run these events. It's not just churches, man. Like, this is, when you move out and you move into culture where culture actually is, what you'll see is that some of the people that are vehemently against the things that we believe kind of give way a little bit because they see the impact, the positive impact in the space. You can mess that up. I promise that you can. But if you do it correctly, you'll find yourself in some of those spaces. Nurch is out in Germany. Yeah, they're doing like legitimate events for nerd culture people. And I mean, they're also hanging out with like, the Nintendo Club in that area. and the president of the Nintendo Club of Germany like comes and hangs out with them regularly and is a part of their events. They're doing home church and all sorts of stuff. Like we got to go and be a part of that when we were in Europe, and it was just amazing. We're standing around and there's like, what was it, like 50 or so people there at the launch event, and I'm asking like, oh man, how many of these people are Christian? And Philip's like, I don't know, you and 3 other people, you know, like. Okay, how about all the people that like got up and spoke and played the harp and said how great this event was and invited people, and they're like, no, they're not Christians. I was like, okay, well, what about the guy that translated everything you said for me and for Matt so that we could understand? And he's like, nope, that guy's not a Christian either. I was like, well, I bet he is now. That dude preached the gospel to me. But I mean, there are like a billion other things across the world that exist. And I'm telling you guys, you need to get involved in something. Even if you're an organization, you need to partner with somebody else that is doing it. It can't just be you. If it's just you, it will fail, and I promise you that. We see it time and time and time again that people set out with good intentions to do something, but they don't have the staying power. They just die. And it's sad because you look at that like, man, that would have been really great. God could have done something really wonderful and special. That reaches into a space that I never could have. But it didn't have the legs. So I'm encouraging partnerships. Partnerships. I'm telling you, like I'm not doing anything that I'm not doing myself. I'm leading by example here. LTN, like we are going to continue to exist due to partnerships. Right? We cannot continue to do everything ourselves. We've got our hands in a lot of different pots, and we can't do it all ourselves. So partner. So where do we think nerd culture ministry is going? I think that we're in full swing, right? Like, does anybody feel like we're kind of not like doing well in some areas? I think that we're in pretty good. We could use a lot more money in the stuff that we're doing, right? I stopped apologizing for ministry costing money a long time ago. It's just a thing. To be able to travel here and stay in a castle and live indoors and eat fresh food, like that takes money, right? And so I think that those kinds of circumstances aside, I think we're doing pretty well. Churches are starting to come on board and understand some of the things that are happening, which, to be fair, was one of the last dominoes I thought was going to fall. I thought it was going to be the biggest holdout for the church to finally understand. But let's look at a couple more numbers I think this is why the church is falling in line. So globally, the number of Christians on the planet, now these are estimates, okay? Number of Christians on the planet. Currently, as of 2024, the estimate is 2.6 billion people, okay? The world's population is 8.2, all right? So it's around a third-ish, not a math major, but it's around a third-ish, right? The number of unique people who play video games globally, these are like hard numbers that you can look at a computer and just copy and paste into an Excel spreadsheet. Those hard numbers are 3.3 billion people just playing video games. So the church can look at those numbers and go, there's need, there's a gap, there are people in our own neighborhood that we're not reaching with our local church. So how many more are we not reaching online? How many more are we not reaching because there are people who can't identify with the thing that you find joy in life and peace and understanding in? We have to be able to equip people to go into those spaces as missionaries to love and serve those people. And so we're no longer in the shadows. We're out in public. People are seeing us. It's geeky chic and nerds rule the world, right? Like it's just the thing. And I think we saw the craziest thing at the end of October when the Catholic Church released their mascot. And it was, how do you say the name of this mascot? Luce? Luce, okay. L-U-C-E, Luce. Little chibi anime character, right? And this was this was it. They did it like, the post came out on like October the 28th, and it was really right before Halloween. Take that, Satan, kind of a deal. And so they said that it was done in an effort to live even within the pop culture so beloved by our youth. That's a statement from the Catholic Church. Now, I'm not standing up here and saying, hey, since the Catholic Church did this, maybe here's some other things that we should be doing. I'm not saying that. It has not really been, it has not been a movement of progress for us to follow what the Catholic Church is doing. I'm not making any statement. I'm just saying, like, if we stay in one spot, they're very stalwart, right? Like, the Catholic Church doesn't change very often. So for them to make this massive movement into culture, how many of you are like, that's going to end poorly, Catholic Church? It's, hey there, fellow kids, throwing a skateboard over your shoulder kind of a deal. The memes are fantastic. The memes are great. But, like, actual impact, I was like, whoa, boy, this is not going to end well. It's about to get real hard for me to do what I do in this space. But it was received very well. I was surprised. People are making memes about it, but how does that not propel you into the center of the cultural zeitgeist, right? That makes you popular. That makes people want to follow those things. And so what I'm saying is that if the Catholic Church can do it, I guarantee that we can do it. We just have to be bold in the spaces that we're in, just step out and say, no, this is important. This is something that I think that somebody who's in this space needs to hear. They need to understand, like with Luce. Like they just need to be able to see a thing that they like associated with something that they have immense amounts of disdain for. And even that little piece of representation changes an entire mindset, starts a conversation, creates a gap where you can talk to people about things. And so, I think that we can do that. By being here this week, whether you know it or not, you're a part of that movement that is like directly 100% focused on looking people directly in the eyes and telling them that the things that they love matter because it matters to them and they matter to God. And it shouldn't matter if they know the difference between Power Rangers and Super Sentai. Those people are still people that God loves, cares about, and died for. We got to stop drawing the lines. We need to look into spaces where people are hurting. We need to look into spaces where people are actively engaging instead of standing in our spaces and yelling at them to come to us. We need to go into those spaces and tell them, hey, Jesus loves you, and I really like to play a game with you. I really like to watch this anime with you. I'd really like to read this manga. I'd really like to do whatever it is that you want to do because I also want to do that thing. But what we can't do is step into spaces where we have no desire for those things and tell them that they should like the things that we like or that I'm the expert in those things, because I'm not. D&D and anime, I promise you, I'm not the experts in those two areas. And so I don't step into those spaces and pretend to be. I step into those spaces and I let people teach me things. Hey, you really like this anime. Why? Tell me why. I would like to understand why this was a game changer for you. So we need to do that. We need to push the hate aside, kick it all the way off. And we need to embrace love. Love of people who think differently than we do about any number of topics. I mean any number of topics. You can fill whatever you want into that bubble. Any number of topics. Kick it off to the side and be able to sit down with them, love them well, and understand their story. Because I'm telling you right now, the people that we deal with in nerd culture, people that we do ministry to in nerd culture, they have a better reason for being outside of church than most of you have for being in it. That is a hard truth, and I'm sorry. But it's where we are. It's where we are. And I want you guys to understand that it's our responsibility to fix those wrongs. If you get nothing else out of this talk, take this phrase with you. Hey, it's not my fault, but it is my problem. I may not be the reason you hate Jesus or the church or whatever, but man, that is my problem. My goal by the end of this conversation is not to change your mind, but it's about to help you to understand that you're loved by the creator of the universe. That's what I want. That's what I want for everybody. They can do what they want with that information, but we have to be able to get to the point where people understand that just because we believe in Jesus doesn't mean that we don't care about them, because they don't. That's missions 101. Moving into spaces where people hate the God that you love and loving them well in those spaces. So I've got a, hey, Matt, will you bring my phone up for me, please? I left it over there. I left it in the bathroom. I left it on the table. I guess the whole thing.
You left it on. We turned it off.
Oh, no, I need it on.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. I'm not doing things, I'm not calling you all to do things that I'm not willing to do myself. And so I want to show you a conversation that I had online. I don't recommend getting into conversations with people online about a lot of things, but I think that there are some times where we can have conversations with people in digital spaces, because that's where they are. They're living on Facebook, they're living on X, they're living, on whatever platform they happen to be on at that time. They're there. They're sharing the things that they care about and that are true to them in their space. So we actually, for the Nerd Culture Ministry Summit, we did a lot of local targeting. And what that means is that we spammed a lot of people to tell them that we were having this conference. And so we got some people in one of our videos that messaged us and said, publicly, one of them said, hey, considering about 75% of what goes on in pop culture is against the church, ? This isn't a good thing. This isn't as good a thing as you're thinking. That was the understanding. And I had a couple of people message me about that, and we're like, oh man, what are you going to take that down, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm not going to take that down. Why would I take that down? But I'm not mad at the person that asked me. I'm not mad at the person that said that. I simply move into explain mode, because I think that what happens is a lot of times we get painted into corners as people, as human beings. When somebody asks us a question, it's a very direct question. They want a one-word answer, yes or no. And I think the world's way more nuanced than that. Way more nuanced. How did I get to yes? How did I get to no? Let's go on a journey. So, this is what I said. I said, hey, that's a great point. First off, that's a great point. I acknowledge what you said. Some of them have been widely displayed for all the world to see. But we believe that a major area of growth can happen if properly addressed. Those of us leading the summit love and engage in nerd culture daily. It's where we find rest, fun, and most of our community. And we just don't engage with other people of like faith, but that would be a completely disingenuous way to go about it, and that is not our aim. Again, if we only echo chamber, that's a good way to kind of turn people off as well. We understand, and we want to help people that are in the church understand, that just because someone likes comics, anime, video games, or whatever else, that it doesn't make them unworthy of being loved, cared for, and ascribed the value that they should be. We aim to change that evaluation of nerds from those who so easily judge them, because we are not counting conversions. We don't believe that everyone, or we do believe that everyone is someone to be loved and is worth putting ourselves out there just to say, Jesus loves you, nerd. That's a big deal for us. No talks of hellfire, brimstone, just love. Not being shallow in our approach, but recognizing that people are far more likely to spend time with those that they love than those that they hate. That's kind of a simple understanding that we forget a lot of times. But I'll even add to that, I think a lot of times the people that we talk to about these things, we don't want to see again. And I think that should change too. And we'd like to spend more time with these people. I hope this helps to paint the purpose of the Nerd Culture Ministry Summit for you. We aren't staging an invasion. We are nerds too, and we want to help people build healthy relationships and change the perceptions of Christianity in places where it has earned every nasty look and scoff that it has. I promise that this is more about retaining people of faith, retraining people of faith to look and act more like the Jesus that they love and they're called to. Absolutely no judgment or conversion techniques here. Hey, you can go and watch last year's if you'd like, free of charge. It'll help to frame this whole conversation. But even if you don't, it might be worth keeping an eye on this just so you can see. Love to talk to you later. Her response, my response is this long, right? Her response, wow. All I can say is thank you. I had the best day after that. She went on in another section of that post and actually started to defend other people that were, talking down about this. And I was like, didn't ask you to do that, wild. But because I step into a space and I say, you are right, man. Hey, I love you. I don't know you, but I love you. I invited him, come on out. Probably not here, but I invited him to come on out, It's one of those things where we have to be willing to step into those spaces. So it quickly changed a very, very deep conversation that was hurtful, pain-filled, into an empathetic, loving situation where we could actually see each other as human beings. There are so many outside forces that show people what it means to be a Christian. Friends, as of last week, it got a lot harder to do what we do. I'm not making a political statement. I'm telling you the facts of life. It got a lot harder to show people what true love in Jesus actually looks like. There is a very vivid picture in some people's minds about what it means to be a Christian, and it's inaccurate. It's up to you and I to love people well in those spaces, to say, not what would my friends do, what did my church taught me to do, what did my dad tell me to do, what would Jesus do in that situation? And I'm telling you, he would look them deep in the eyes and he would say, the things that you care about matter because they matter to you and you matter to God. Welcome to the Nerd Culture Ministry Summit. You have now finished the tutorial level and you guys are ready to go out on the main quest. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, that's all I got for you guys this morning. Mark's going to come up. We're going to do a little Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, we'd love to field those for you.
Thanks, Bubba. Hey guys, why don't you take a seat? One of the things that we like to do last year at NCMS is just take a minute or two and chat. And so if you have a question, we open it up to the room. And if you're in the chat, the Muppets on the top floor will shout. No, I'm just joking. We'll shout it down to us if you're in the chat and you do have a question. But before we get into that, Bubba, I want to focus in on something that you said that you didn't really touch on a whole lot. But I know this is part of the heartbeat of LTN. I know this is part of Luke's heartbeat as well with the mission trips. I've been on 2, and I'll be back with LTN at PAX Unplugged here in a couple of weeks, which I'm really excited for. They're really great experiences. But it's such an interesting environment because for me, as a Christian growing up in the church, even as a nerd, you walk into some of these conventions. My wife has said, Mark, I'd rather go to Africa with you 5 times than go to one of these conventions because it's just not my wife's space, right? And to be honest, I am leagues outside of my own comfort zone in them, even as a nerd very frequently. And so, but one of the things that LTN really focuses on in training and prep and then being there is this importance of meeting people where they are and just building relationships with them, which happens so easily over a board game. And I've seen it firsthand happen. Can you talk just for the briefest, just a few moments about why relational evangelism specifically is so important to you guys at LTN? Yeah,
and I think that's good. I mean, as we're talking about defining terms and phrases and words that we're going to use, relational evangelism, that's the thing. It's different than street preaching. Okay, I was a youth pastor for 5.5 years, and that was the longest decade of my life. And it's one of those things where I took students into like situations and scenarios where they were ill-equipped. I mean, on every level, they were ill-equipped to have those conversations with people. But that's what you do on a missions trip, ? I don't know, like you're supposed to go and do these kinds of things. And so we decided very early on in Love Thy Nerd that, man, we'd build such great relationships with people at these conventions. What would it be like if we just leaned into that as our ministry model, right? We're going to let them kind of decide where we are and what we do. And honestly, that's kind of what it is. Like, God's driving everything that we do, but the shifting of culture, we don't listen or follow anybody on Reddit or X or anything like that. We listen to the people that are in that space, and they tell us kind of as the winds are changing. And so the relational part of it allows us to have conversations with people who, again, are not talking to anybody else. But now we're starting to see that, much like this person in the post, like that's becoming a common occurrence. That people they're not just like, oh, you see me and you understand. They're starting to reach out to other people on our behalf. People will say things like, oh, yeah, that's that Christian organization, right? And they're like, stop, I hear you, it's different. I don't know how to get, it's going to take a long time for you to get to how it's different, but I promise that it is different. And the way that has changed, it's not by the words that I say, it's by the things that I do. It's by how our organization lives out and the actual partnerships and relationships that we build over the course of a decade now. Matt and I have been building relationships with people close to like 15 years that are now starting to see some fruit. Here's a great example. I didn't have this example last time because this is how time works on the calendar, right? And so, we'd been loving and just being there with a guy and his now wife for years. I mean, since we were Game Church, it went all the way back. And so we'd loved them well through those times. And when the two of them, who were industry people, were getting married, they said, hey, Bubba, will you come and do our wedding? I just said yes. We didn't look at any of the details or anything like that, but it's like, absolutely, I will make everything work. I missed a show. You were at Origins. I missed a show to go and do that wedding because that was the most important thing that I could do in that moment. He trusted me at that moment with everything, literally everything in his life. The most important thing in his life at that moment was marrying the love of his life. And he said, I couldn't think of anybody else but you to be there for that. And that's not, oh, Bubba's great. That's the relationship. Everybody can be in a similar situation to that. Maybe you're not officiating weddings, but in a similar situation where people have the most deep and emotional parts of their life that they want to share with you. I think that's the benefit of relational outreach.
Yeah, I love that. Obviously, street preaching could be the equivalent of sort of a disembodied evangelism, right? And the online space and nerd space can lend itself more to that than less, right? We can become more disembodied rather than more embodied in the space. And I think the goal and what I love about LTN, and it's part of our heartbeat at Lux, is this idea of being incarnational. How do I actually be there with you, build a relationship with you, know your name, know your spiritual story, know where you've been, walk with you through something, and through the relationship that we built, you get to know Jesus because you have hands-on experience through me trying to live like Jesus while in relationship with you. I just want to challenge and also encourage us, any of us who's in nerd ministry in this room, it can be very tempting to look at big numbers, YouTube videos, comments, reposts, viral things and be like, that's really what ministry is about, is like spreading the gospel as virally as possible. And a lot of what NCMS has been focused on, because it's what LTN and Lux are focused on, is the exact opposite of that. It's grow small, grow intentionally, build relationships, know people deeply, love them well. And those things are really, really important to us. And one of the things I really want to emphasize. Anybody have any questions, anything that Bubba talked about you just want to emphasize or poke at just a little bit before we close and move on? Yeah, go ahead, man.
You mentioned that you're starting to see church involvement grow in nerd ministry. You also mentioned that it was one of the last dominoes you thought would fall.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about that and how you're starting to see that involvement grow?
I'm going to say it for the stream. The question that was asked was, Bubba said he's seeing what he assumed to be one of the last dominoes to fall, which is churches getting on board and church involvement. How are you actually seeing that happen?
Yeah, so I was very surprised because we met a lot of resistance pretty early on. So I'm full stop resistance early on. Just not, I don't really understand that. Just, no, we don't do that. And so we pivoted out of that. I was actually on staff at a church, and I found myself going outside of that environment to be fulfilled in my calling, to serve Jesus, just generally speaking. I found myself having to go and join organizations at that time like game church that would allow me to go on these mission trips where I could effect change and talk to people who understood the things that I understood. I was going into, these parts of the world that understood the language that I spoke, which is very important, not just for the people that hear it, but also for the people that speak it. And so when we started to see kind of some of these churches come on board, we started to see it with our home churches, right? Like the people that told us no initially, but then watched for the next 5 to 7 years, things grow. And churches see ministries pop up all the time. All the time. We had a handbag ministry at our church at one point. I can't tell you why, but it lasted about a week and a half, but it got a logo, and so that's how you know it was official. But that thing came and went, whereas people have seen the things that I'm doing with Love Thy Nerd specifically, and now we held NCMS at my church. Like, there's no looking away from that, right? When I tell them 100 people from 10 different countries show up, their heads turn. And so they're left with no other option than to embrace this thing. They may not understand it, but now the people that said no, their kids are starting to grow up a little bit more. Starting to play a little bit more Fortnite and do the Snoop Dogg dance and all sorts of stuff. And so, like, they're looking for answers, and they have none. And if they can see somebody who does, that they love and they trust, that's where we started to kind of see that turn. And then we started to see other people get on board that were like, man, it's working for you. Maybe it can work for me. And that started to grow. And so the domino fell a lot earlier than I had expected it to, but man, I'm so glad that it did. I'm so glad it did, because now you can get up on a Sunday morning and preach and talk about Captain America, nerd culture stuff, and like whatever you want to, and people in the audience, in the congregation, feel seen because of that. I have conversations with pastors all the time, and I'm like, just add one nerdy reference to something that you're talking about. The easiest one is Yoda. It's just the easiest in the world, all right? We're always talking about people should do things and don't do things, like, oh, I'm trying really hard. Do or do not, there is no try. You don't even have to quote Yoda. They'll come tell you, oh, I didn't know you were Star Wars, like all sorts of stuff. Like, when people start to feel seen, then people in the upper levels of, like leadership and stuff, they start to feel that from the bottom up. And so that's kind of, for us, where it started, and what I've seen it kind of spread. And I mean, man, you got to talk to Nerd Pastor Nate down here in the front, man, about what's going on at conferences and UMCs and getting rooms and screens and all sorts of stuff. It's wild. I have been contacted by organizations. I've been contacted by camps. I've been contacted by people, top down, all over the place, that are like, hey, can you do that with us? Jamie's another guy to talk to about that, because he planted satellite right here, satellite gaming in Colorado Springs with a church. And so, like, we're starting to see, again, that cultural zeitgeist really change because we were steadfast.
I think it's that. I think two other things I just want to mention. One, there's a massive shift inside the church in America right now where boomer pastors who planted their churches and late Gen Xers are handing the reins to millennial pastors right now who are secretly nerds and no one knew. And then they connect with one of our ministries.
Got 'em.
And they're like, oh my freaking, I play Destiny every night. Can we please talk, right? And it's like, we find so many people who come in who are youth pastors and pastors who are partially home at Lux now, where we're like the church that they're growing at, but they're pastoring their church because, man, they just needed a place where they could catch a breath of fresh air with people who understand them. The other thing I want to say is Jamie is going to be one of our keynotes on the last day. Wave, Jamie. And one of the things that he is going to talk about is the ability to communicate between what we're doing and what the church world and other ministry worlds are in a way that's effective, that people can actually receive, and what stories actually translate. One of the biggest obstacles that we have as nerds is that we're too nerdy sometimes, and we talk about things that people who don't understand the world that we're in rightfully don't give a rip about, and it sabotages our ability to get people on board because we don't tell the right stories. And one of the things that Jamie is going to be, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I'm freaking really excited. I'm genuinely really excited about it because of what Satellite has done, and the ability for them to make something that's sustainable is very unique in this space. And a lot of that is because of Jamie's capability of communicating between what he's doing and what he loves and people who don't know anything about it, in a way that's really effective and stories that really reach. And so make sure you're here in the keynote for that.
I think that the interesting thing about that, and then we'll move on to the next one, is that, again, speaking the language is important. And so many of us that are, kind of starting this and leading out with it are pastors or former pastors. And so we speak that language. And for those of you in this room that are like, man, how do I tell my pastor about this? We can do that. This live stream, this video can do that. I love to sit down with pastors. Oh my gosh, I love to sit down with pastors. The first thing I do when I sit down with a pastor is talk to them about the books that are on their shelves. Hey man, you like things. I've read that book. What did you think about that? I find something I can talk about, and I engage them in the spaces that they're in. But what it does is it kind of evens the playing ground. They see me as a human. I see them as a human. And now we can have a conversation of how people can be reached with the love of Jesus in that space.
We're over on time, and most of you probably have to pee. So, with that being said, if you peed before camp, perfect. If you have any other questions, feel free to come up and chat with Bubba. I'm going to command that he stays here for just a couple of minutes and can answer questions one-on-one. We're going to go to a brief break, but before we do that, I want to emphasize a couple of things. We are going to be back in here. We were going to be in here at 10:30. We're going to be back in here at 10:45 instead, where we're going to be talking with John from Reliant, who's one of our key sponsors. We're going to be chatting with them about what they do and about his breakout later today. In addition to that, a couple of other things that are really important during our break. We have ministry tables that are all out here, and you have this ministry passport. And so what we're asking you to do is visit them, and they'll give you a stamp on your passport if you go and hang out at one of their tables. Fill out this entire thing and finish every ministry table. Turn in your card with your name on it. We're going to do a drawing for a giveaway at the end of NCMS, so make sure that you do that. Check in with Gilded Graylands, who are up in Cedar Ridge. Yes. Question?
I think down in Cedar Ridge.
In the bottom of Cedar Ridge. Don't hesitate to walk up Cedar Ridge. Check them out. It's a board game shop. They're also going to be doing game showcases over the course of this week. We bought a lot of games from them last year, so you should buy a lot from them this year. Make some room. Throw out some of your clothes so you can take it home with you from Colorado Springs. And also, don't forget to go check out the coffee shop and the cafe down the hill at Carriage House. Carriage House, is that? Yes. I just keep looking at Sam, and she nods at me. We should just have a second camera on Sam to see what she's nodding.
Sam is our cultural translator, right?
Yeah, to see if I'm telling truth or I'm just spitting lies this whole time. That's going to do it for the opening of NCMS. Go to the bathroom, grab a drink, go check something out, walk around the outside for a little bit, connect with someone. Back here in a half hour. Hey guys, 3-minute warning, 3-minute warning. Wrap up a conversation, get that pass stamped. Go to the restroom like I'm gonna run and do real quick. 3-minute warning. Yeah. That, and I'm going to have you probably just talk a little bit about the ministry that you built and what your structure is behind it and why it's important. Then I'm also going to share, so we'll probably open up with just like a little bit of conversation about like what it is that you're doing, what it is that you built, why you think it's important, how you went about structuring it to be gospel focused. And I'll do the same, because ours is a and I'll talk about what we've done, and then we'll just have an open chat. No, I don't need you to say anything that isn't already in your heart and something that you live and breathe and think about every single day. Like the stuff that you are already all about is just the stuff that I want to share. So,
Yeah, I had some thoughts on it, but I did can you
no, I don't think we need anything specific. I'm just going to ask you to share a little about your ministry. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about it, probably. I'm going to share a couple about ours. Because D&D is just not, it's such a good idea. It's so big. There's no real way. This isn't about prescription. It's about here's exactly what we need to do. And we're also not teaching people D&D rules. Like, we're just telling them why D&D as a ministry, if you think about it differently, can work really well and also share Jesus with people. And it can work in settings where you're doing something like what you're doing, or in settings Okay, everybody, we're going to get going here for keynote number 2. Make your way in and have a seat here with us if you would. Yeah, you can have that right there, John. Yeah, that's perfect. Come on. Come on in, everybody. Have a seat with us. Have a seat, have a seat. Oh, this thing's heavy. Holy cow. It's metal. The whole thing is steel. The whole thing is steel. Well, as others are making their way in and coming in to connect, one of the things that we really like to do, and we did at NCMS last year, was we like to highlight some of our sponsors. But that is not just because they sponsored us. It's also because they are leaders in more conventional ministry often that also have a passion for our space. And so like they're people who get it. And in the church world, that can be kind of rare to find people who get it and who want to be involved with what it is that we're working on. And so from very early on in our journey with NCMS, Reliant had become a partner who had come alongside us and just has been all about what it is that we're doing at NCMS. They've been an amazing sponsor, an awesome partner, and John, I feel like I want to start the one of us chant or something. But John has really become, in many ways, one of us. I don't actually know what you do for Reliant, John, so I'll let you introduce yourself. And he's like, I was laid off last week. No, I'm just, you can tell us what you do for Reliant and tell us a little about Reliant as well.
Yeah, I was laid off, but part of my severance was I still get to take the Colorado trip.
Oh,
so,
amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Forever. Yeah, they have to keep sending you back. Yeah.
Yes. Hey, y'all. I'm John Crawford. I work with Reliant, and what I do at Reliant is just help meet new potential partners. This is what I do. And the reason for that and the heart of that is at Reliant, we talk about, we just want to help make more ministry possible. And that's at the heart of who I am as a church planner and the things that I've done. And so going out to the places and finding, hey, here's some people that are trying to do ministry and doing ministry in this way. And sustainable funding is really difficult for them, whether that's because of the model or the things that they're doing or where they're at. And they're like, hey, I'd love to give more time. I'd love to be able to like have health insurance. I'd love to be able to make a paycheck, you know, like those sorts of things. I don't know if any of those things resonate with you guys. But doing those sorts of things, so we help make that possible by helping train and coach folks on how to raise support and then handling all the kind of back-end technical details of employment with them as well and giving them access to things like health insurance, retirement, payroll, making all that happen. So those are the things we do, and it really comes back down to, for me, what I just say over and over again is like, I'm just here to make more ministry possible, and if that serves folks, then great. I'd love to be a part of that. And this really kind of fit well with my role in getting to do that. And somebody else had connected and it's like, hey, there's the Nerd Culture Ministry Summit. Who wants to go? And I like immediately shot up my hand because I was like, please let me go hang out with my people for a minute. That would be really great. And so just my heart to, there is, you know, I was joking with you a little bit last night of, I get to go and do lots of stuff, and then I get to meet all sorts of people that are doing the coolest stuff all across the world, and really get to be a piece of it. But then the things and the stories and the people, what you guys are doing in this room is really close to my heart and really close to the things that I'm doing when I'm spending time at my tabletop store that's just opened up this last year, like a few blocks away. I don't own it, sorry, just a new tabletop store just opened up around the corner. When I'm hanging out in the Discords, when I'm doing these things, and knowing that you guys are out there being present, loving people, showing them the love of Christ, it's just important. It's like really important to me. So I'm here to help serve you guys if that serves. So.
Awesome. I don't know if Reliant likes me saying this or not, but it's how I've described you because it's been helpful for me. I always say that Reliant is the home for homeless missionaries.
That's great.
In some capacity. I think that. What was it? You can have that. Yeah. I think
I'm putting it on the website with your picture.
Right.
There.
Perfect. Yes, please. A quote. One of the things that I love about Reliant is they get innovators. and they get people who are willing to try something new. And what most people who are innovators and try to get something new do not understand are laws. That's why innovators oftentimes get themselves in trouble, because they unknowingly break laws, financial laws and all sorts of things. And so I remember actually sitting with somebody at Origins this last year in the board game community, and they work for a company, and they're like, yeah, listen, the board game community and creators are full of these incredibly passionate, highly creative people with no knowledge of how to establish a supply line or to do any of the financial back end to actually make their product work. And in many cases, I feel very similar about this space, where we have a lot of people who are very creative, who love people a lot, who are super passionate, but we don't really have a lot of people with education and understanding how nonprofits work, how setting up an organization works, how to apply for a 501c3, how to get that stuff set up, and then how to actually receive funds to be able to fund our lives while doing ministry, or just fund our ministry while we're bivocational in a way that not only economically makes sense and can support our families and ourselves, but on the backside of that also is legal. And so even small things like realizing, hey, if you go to your church and ask for money to support you, it's not easy. It's morally gray to straight up not legal for a nonprofit to write a check to an individual for something they didn't even do. Like they didn't perform a service for them. There's no contract between them. Being able to work with an organization like Reliant allows nonprofits to work directly with you through a nonprofit, because you actually get to work directly with Reliant, you guys call them employees, kind of like the missionaries become employees of Reliant, raising your funds, doing that in a completely legal way that also gives you things like access to retirement and access to health care and paychecks that are regular and a way to actually run a budget, doing all the grown-up things that we all need to do to help legitimize what we're doing in the space. And I love how Reliant has come alongside some of us in this very room to help us do exactly that.
Yeah, and that's our hearts, right? We want to see, one of like pieces of my heart is just like, hey, you can have sustainable ministry. You know, I know some of you are burning late hours streaming, or you're going and it's like, well, if I look through my couch and find enough dollars, I can get to this event and like do this thing. And really my heart is to say like, hey, let's have sustainable ministry. We talk about a biblical model of support raising, how to raise support, how to invite people to be co-workers within the thing that you're doing and do all those things really well. But then also, I think as Mark said, one of the gifts of being a part of the organization that we are is, I like to say, I am tired of seeing Christians in the news for doing really bad stuff with money. And we just don't do that. Like, we don't play that way. But we help get that right. We help do those things. But ultimately so that you can do more ministry, so that you can do those things. You can say yes to those opportunities as they come up. So.
One of the other things I really like, John, is sitting down and meeting with you is this help in counting the cost, which is something that we've talked about on the NCMU podcast an awful lot. If you have not checked that out, quick plug, in addition to the Nerd Culture Ministry Collective and the Summit, which is the event, the collective is the group, the Summit is the event, one of our pieces of content out there is the NCMU, the Nerd Culture Ministry Underground podcast, where we interview and talk with people who are in this space, many of them doing this full time, who are doing all kinds of creative and really cool stuff. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in that is counting the cost. What is this actually going to cost you financially? What is this going to cost you in terms of time? What is this going to cost your family? Before you decide to quit your job and jump in with both feet to this new ministry or live streaming, how much money do you actually need to bring in to be able to afford bread and rent? The sacrifice that you're making right now, what is the long-term sacrifice of not being able to invest in your retirement for the next 6 years as you build up your base? How much is that going to actually cost you when you're 60? Questions like that, and counting the actual cost of diving into this ministry rather than just jumping in with a bunch of piss and passion. I've never used those two words right next to each other. Sorry.
It's
sorry
alliteration.
about
It's good.
That internet has been super, super valuable. Sometimes it is really great for us to count the cost, and some of us realize through that, like, hey, I am called to this, but I'm actually called to support someone in this rather than be the person who's starting this. Conversations with Reliant and John can help you begin to count that cost and really see, what is this going to look like, not just for my day-to-day, because I'm excited about it this morning, but what is it going to look like for tomorrow and the next year and the next however many years that I'm building a legacy doing this ministry. And John and Reliant help you to establish that base and build something that sustains you but can also outlast you, which is really what the kingdom is about. It's not about us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, hoping to be sustainable and what that looks like and do those things. And so if I could just real fast, like a couple like quick
Yes, do it.
applications, say you're somebody in the room and you're part-time doing the ministry that you're called for that brought you here and doing the thing, and part-time you're doing another thing. And you're like, you know what, full-time sounds dope. We can talk about that. We can help you raise that support, get you going, getting those things so you can give more time to that thing. Another application, maybe you're in this room and you're like, hey, I'm just trying to learn. I would love to do like a residency. I want to spend time. I want to throw myself, be a part of an organization. You're willing to raise your support, and there's maybe even an organization in this room that you'd love to work with, then we can help work with you and them. And you guys have to agree there has to be a real job. You're doing things. It's not just like, hey, I want to hang out. That'd be cool. Like, no, what is the thing you're going to do and partner with? But then we can help get that funding, do those things, make that happen. So there's a few quick applications for that, and beyond, there's lots of other things. So come and chat if you're like, do you do this? I'll let you know real fast if we can help you or not.
Yeah, and if you're looking for organizations to do a residency with, I can probably name like 6 in this room who would love for you to raise the funds and come and help us continue to expand the kingdom and do the ministry that we're doing. Okay, John, the real question, the most important one, the board game shop that's down your house, what is the game that you're most into at the moment? And it can be video game, board game, D&D, whatever. What are you most digging on right now? What are you passionate about?
Yeah, D&D. So I am doing a lot of, between full-time job, master's program, and pastoring, I don't have a ton of spare time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you chose one of the biggest commitments in gaming.
Well, I'm not in a campaign right now, so that's what helps. I'd spin up lots of little one-shots to do a little one-shot. My brother-in-law is taking me through a Die Hard adapted fantasy edition one-shot right now, which has been super fun, as well as listening to a lot of Dropout, all their Dimension 20, that kind of stuff. So I do a lot of that. That's what I'm enjoying most right now.
Yeah, gaming vicariously through other people. Yeah,
listening to other people game
Yeah,
and longing. Yeah.
Yeah, having 2 kids, I understand that fully. Totally understand it. Okay, awesome. And lastly, we got some cool stuff back here at your Reliant booth. Don't miss this one. Our key sponsor is back here in the corner, not in the ministry hall. You want to go back and visit with them, but tell us what you have back here, because we just got it. Like, it just showed up. Right?
Yeah, so first thing, we have Will. So if you guys want to say hey to Will at some point.
What's up, Will?
He's also here. Works on the technology team. It's great. A fellow nerd. I worked with NTSD Gaming and got some custom D20s made, which I was super stoked about. Y'all, every once in a while with work, I get to do the things that I like that just so happen to work with the event that I'm at too. So trust me, I've kept plenty at my house, so I have plenty to give away still. Come grab some D20s. They're beautiful. And if you have a Dice Goblin addiction, please come on.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, John. Can we just give it up for Reliant and John and their participation here at NCMS? Listen, we're getting ready to head into our second keynote. This is one that I am really excited for. Every now and then, you just take a shot across the bow at somebody who you know you can't afford to have come and speak at your conference when you're planning something at this. And every now and then, that person responds back to you and says, hey, I'd like to be involved in what you're doing. And in this case, Lamar is one of those people this year as someone that we were just like, man, we just really would love to have Lamar here because we think that he has a heart for exactly what we're doing when it comes to setting tables that people can actually come and sit at. Setting tables is common language at our church at Lux. We literally talk about that all the time. What tables are we setting? How can people come sit at them? How can we meet people where they are? How can we hear their spiritual stories? How can we build relationship with them? And a lot of that also comes out of Lamar's book, which I'm sure he is going to talk about during his keynote. So let's go ahead and catch the clip, and then as soon as it's done, let's welcome Lamar to the stage.
Dr. Lamar Hardwick is a father, husband, pastor, and author with deep commitment to serving others. He holds a Master of Divinity from Emory University and a Doctor of Ministry from Liberty University School of Divinity. He has also been recognized as a graduate of the Yale School of Divinity Clergy Scholar Program and Georgia Forward's prestigious Young Game Changers program, which brought together 50 of Georgia's brightest minds and leaders under the age of 40. Currently pursuing his PhD at Union Institute and University in Cincinnati, Ohio, Dr. Hardwick continues to lead with wisdom and grace. Diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at the age of 36, Dr. Hardwick has embraced this part of his journey becoming a passionate advocate for those with disabilities in our faith communities. His work, including the award-winning book, Disability and the Church, A Vision for Diversity and Inclusion, has provided an essential roadmap for how the church can better serve and embrace those with disabilities. Please welcome Dr. Lamar Hardwick to the NCMS stage.
Well, good. Is it morning? No. Good morning-ish. I'm from Georgia, so I'm like 2 hours ahead. So I'm still trying to figure out like what time is it actually. But so I wanna talk a lot about the work that I do, with the understanding that there is a huge overlap in the work that I do and the work that gaming culture, nerd culture does. So I want to start with, go ahead and go to the next slide. Just a few things about me. Now this picture is a couple years old, so everybody in that picture is now taller than me except my wife. So like those are our 3 kids, and they're all like super tall now, and it's very disturbing. But that's just a little bit about me. And you heard in the video, at age 36, I was diagnosed myself on the autism spectrum, so I'm one of those people who are considered a late diagnosis. Although around 7 or 8, I tell people I knew that there were significant differences between me and my peers. Like I pretended to understand a lot of things, I just didn't get people. One of the things that I say is, and this is probably true of nerd culture, right? I felt like I was in a world that was in on an inside joke that I didn't get. And so I was always on the outside trying to figure out what these kids were talking about, and people were just weird. Like they would say I was weird, and I would say, no, you're weird. Like at the heart, I'm a storyteller, so I want to start with a story that sort of frames our time together. There's a story of a woman who fell ill, and unfortunately she died, and so she goes to heaven. Now when she gets there, Peter's at the gate. I don't get this, but every heaven story you've ever heard, Peter's always at the gate, right? I don't understand, like maybe he just got assigned to gate duty because he was in trouble, I don't know. But Peter's at the gate, and so she sees her family and friends waving her in, and it looks like there's a party going on, and so she goes up to Peter and says, look, how do I get into this place? And Peter says, oh, it's easy. All you have to do is spell one little word. And she says, well, what's the word? And he says, love. She says, that's easy, L-O-V-E. Peter says, hey, welcome to heaven. Your family and friends are here. Enjoy Jesus for eternity. Well, a couple years pass, and she runs into Peter, and Peter looks really frantic, and so he grabs her and says, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you watch the gate? The Lord really has me busy today doing other things. Can you watch the gate? She says, oh, yeah, no problem. He says, now remember, if anyone shows up at the gate, have them spell the word. She says, love. He says, you got it. Just go ahead and handle that for me. I really appreciate it. Well, after about a couple of hours of standing there, her husband shows up at the gate. Some of you are looking like, yeah, this is not going to go well. And so he sees his family and friends. It looks like there's a party going on in heaven. And she sees her husband. She says, oh, my God, it is so good to see you. Before I let you in, tell me what were some of the things that happened on earth after I died? And he was real quiet. He didn't want to answer. And he says, well, you're not going to like this, but you know how you and your sister look exactly alike? Well, after you died, I missed you so much. So 6 months after you died, I married your sister. And she leans back and says, oh, really? What else happened after I died? He says, you're not going to like this either, but 6 months after I married your sister, we played the lottery and hit, and we won $150 million. And she says, oh, really? He sees his family and friends waving him in. He's like, enough about me. How do I get into this place? She said, oh, it is simple. All you got to do is spell one little word. He says, well, what's the word? She says, Czechoslovakia. That was kind of a test to see. I like you guys. Now, it's a funny story, but the reason I say that, and I share that story often, is because, whether you're a believer or not, heaven is sort of a cultural placeholder for the ideal, right? We even use it as an adjective. This, we talking about how beautiful it is. It's heavenly, right? Or this ice cream was like, we use it as a placeholder. And a lot of what I'm going to say today, I'm going to talk about disabilities. But in the end, it's about understanding that in our culture, and Christianity has had a lot to do with this, we have crafted the ideals about what it is to be normal, what it is to be human, what it is to be acceptable. And there's a lot of overlap between the work that I do with people with disabilities and the work that is done in gaming and nerd culture, because we are, in effect, fighting against this ideal that's been crafted about what it means to be human, what it means to be normal, what it means to be a part of community. And oftentimes, whether we realize it or not, Christianity has had a say in how those things were crafted. So this is about learning how to fight against some of these ideals and to create a culture of inclusion. But I want to get us on the same page. So next slide, please. So I want to talk about the great banquet. And we know this in Luke 14, and we'll get there. Some of you I know are good church people. And so I often say when I preach, people say, you're not preaching until you get to the scripture. We're going to get there. But I want us to get on the same page, because for some of you, this may be new information about disabilities. As a matter of fact, some of you may not know this, but that the latest data, and I think it's actually increases, that 1 in 4 people in the world have some form of a disability. And it's also 1 in 4 in the United States. I think that number has increased since COVID, because long COVID has started to surface and people are having challenges that they didn't have before, cognitive challenges, breathing challenges. I myself am actually being treated for stage 4 cancer. And so I have some physical disabilities that I didn't have. 2020 was a whopper of a year. COVID hit, and then the fall of that, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. I had a year of remission. It came back, and now I am being treated for stage 4, which we found out over a year ago is inoperable. And so I share that to say, because I like people to know what I'm up against so they can see what God is up to. And so a lot of my work has actually increased, because now I have not just a developmental disability and autism, but I have physical disabilities that I didn't have before 2020. And so go ahead to the next slide. I want us to get an understanding of this so that we can get on the same page before I talk about what it's like to set the table. So disability is often associated with medical or health conditions, physical impairments or limitations, mental or emotional. Oftentimes we classify disability as a physical, developmental, or intellectual disability. And disability is a vastly wide term. So when I say that, it can mean a lot of things. And we don't have time to sort of break it down, but just know that we're using it as an umbrella for what's typically known as a disability. And I should say this as far as language. I use disability, and you hear me say it a lot. As a matter of fact, online I'm known as the autism pastor, and I tell people I actually didn't come up with that. A woman who I was working with very early in my work, when I disclosed my diagnosis publicly, said, you are like the pastor for the autism community, because many of us don't get to go to church. And so before Zoom was cool, I was actually using it to meet with families and pray with them and do all sorts of things. Actually, I was using Skype, and then Zoom just kind of took over, and I don't even know, does Skype even exist anymore? Like, they just, but before video conferencing was cool. And so you think about disability, it's about health independence and engagement in society. And it can vary depending on a few factors. Next slide. It can depend like the severity of the impairment, actually social, political, and cultural influences and expectations. Usually those are what it means to be normal, to have a normal body. The aspects of natural and built surroundings actually influence how we understand disability, availability of assistive technology, and family and community support and engagement all sort of shape how we understand disability. Next slide, please. Now, there's two models that I usually deal with, and this is not all of the models, but I want us to get a firm understanding because it plays a significant part in how we do ministry in my world, but also in how we potentially do ministry in this world. And that is, one, the medical model. The medical model basically says that disability is a biomedical issue alone, that there is something wrong with this person's body, and so it tends to focus on causes and cures. How do we figure out what caused this? How do we get rid of it so that other people are not born with this? And how do we cure it, right? And Christians, I gotta say this, like, we are, for the most part, obsessed with causes and cures, right? We're always looking at, original sin. This is what caused, this is why we're all screwed up, right? And then we want cures. Like, how do we get rid of this? What is the conclusion of this? I think those are very important things, but what I found in studying Jesus and trying to set tables for people with disabilities and people who are different is that Jesus is also very concerned, not just with causes and cures, but with quality of life. How do we as Christians, how do we as the church help improve the quality of life of people who are on the margins and not just try to find ways to fix them? And that's what my ministry is all about, because a lot of times when we think about disability, it is what caused this and how can we stop it and how can we cure it. And there's very little attention paid to how can we improve the quality of that person's life by being a community for them. So the medical model says, hey, let's figure out how to fix people. There's something wrong with your body, there's something wrong with your mind, you're weird, you are not like us, and in order for you to be a part of our community, we need to find a way to make you like us. That's the medical model. There's another model called the social model, and it departs significantly from the medical model because it pays acute attention to society and the ways in which it socializes people who have disabilities. And I'm going to substitute the term socializes people who are different. That's the ideals I talked about just a few minutes ago. And the social model of disability doesn't view disability simply as an impairment that needs to be managed or fixed, but it looks at a complex understanding of the ways in which society's narratives about disability, or I'll say even difference, are oftentimes more disabling than the actual impairment itself. What do you mean? For people who have, and I now have mobility challenges because the chemo, my first time around, destroyed my feet. And I'm so glad, maybe my friend is up here. Jeff found me yesterday struggling to get up to the hill. And he said, do you want to ride? And the golf cart said yes, because the chemo destroyed my feet. I have extreme neuropathy. It is difficult for me to walk long distances. But people with mobility issues, maybe they're wheelchair users, will find that oftentimes if we as society actually create environments that give them the same access we have, then the fact that they have mobility issues is not as challenging as the fact that we have actually created a world that's not built for them. You following me? So the social model says sometimes it's the way that we treat people with disabilities or difference that's actually more disabling than what the actual impairment is. And if we figure out a way to be more accommodating and more inclusive, then the disability or the difference that they have is actually not as much of an impairment as we have made it out to be. Next slide, please. So the social model advocates for the participation of society in the ridding of disabling structures. And I'll add the structures that actually keep people who are different out from community. And because of the primary perspective in this model of social, the issue at hand is a robust examination and critique of cultural and ideological understanding of issues such as impairment, chronic pain, suffering, and body image. And can I say, I love the church. I've pastored for over 20 years. I recently retired because of the rigor of the treatment that I'm in, but I love the church. And so sometimes I critique the church because I love the church. And we don't do very well with those things I just mentioned. Understanding impairment, chronic pain, suffering, body image, disability. And so I frame it this way. The question theologically then for us is, what does it mean to be human? And for many years, and I've done a lot of research on this. He mentioned I'm doing another doctorate, PhD in ethics, which is sort of my stamp for I'm really I'm a for real nerd. Like I just stay in school all the time. I am a glutton for punishment. But a large part of that is because I want to do some work on not just helping the church, but helping policies and the things that further disenfranchise people with disabilities. But I say this to say we have to think about what does it mean to be human. And for a long time in the history of the church, a lot of the position that we have taken to help form some of those ideals and some of those images of what it meant to be human is that we have lifted up an ideal or lifted up an image that to be able-bodied and independent is the apex of the human experience. Which, if you read scripture, nothing can be further from the truth. We were never created to be independent. We were created to be interdependent. And a large part of how we socialize with people with disabilities or difference is that we measure their worth by their ability to be ruggedly independent. And if you're not, there's something wrong with you. You are weird. You're not a part of our community because you don't meet this superficial ideal or standard that we've created, and in some cases have worshiped as being the apex of the human experience. I don't believe, and we'll get to this, I don't believe that that's what Jesus teaches us. Next slide. So understanding disability and difference is that there's a challenge of being disabled or different is a challenge that requires whole-scale societal and environmental changes. The management of disability or difference is a social responsibility. How we handle people who are different is a social responsibility. It is not just left up to medicine to say, these people are different, they have different bodies, they have different minds, here, fix them, and when they're fixed, they can be a part of us. So it has to be then seen as an issue of human dignity and human rights. And for churches and faith communities and faith-based organizations, this means including disability and difference in our discussions about diversity and justice. Which, if I can give sort of a overarching definition of that is that God expects us to use our resources to, as best as we can, level the playing field. So for the church, then, it becomes the issue of justice for people who are disabled or people who are different. How are we trying to level the playing field so that they are included without having to feel like their bodies and their minds have to be fixed before they can be a part of our communities? How can we love them just as they are? Next slide. So then understanding disability is about understanding difference. And this is why I say there's overlap here. That the work that I do and the work that the gaming community and the nerd community do, there's lots of overlap. In fact, I was saying at the table that one of the things that actually accelerated the overlap was COVID, because you found a lot of churches, and I was very critical of this because, again, I love the church, and I even critique my own church. When accessibility became an issue for able-bodied people, churches got real creative on how they found a way to give access to people to their services. All of a sudden, we found money to stream, to have services online, and to do all sort of creative things to help able-bodied people have access. And it benefited people with disabilities, people who were already outside of the community, but the intention was not for that community. And what I love is that the gaming community had already been teaching us how to use streaming, and not just offering services, but how to build digital spaces where real community was happening. And acknowledging that digital community is real community. That it's not just, oh, we just watch services. And so, you know, when I was asked to come, I'm like, I love what you're doing because I get it. I have been on the other side of this trying to push the church because there are a lot of pastors, once COVID sort of waned, said, let's get rid of streaming because we want butts in the seats and people are not coming. And what I advocated for, and you can find where I rebutted a lot of articles from a lot of famous pastors and got myself in trouble. You know, part of being on the spectrum is we just say whatever we think. We don't, like there's, people are like, weren't you scared to say that? I'm like, I didn't know I was supposed to be scared. Like, that's just not how my brain works. It's like, I guess I probably should have thought about that, but, you know, the truth is the truth, right? But it was me advocating for, no, this is real community. And we need to continue to do this because we are now giving access to people who have long been wanting access. And it was actually sort of a telling season because people with disabilities were saying, you could have done this all along. You're doing this because able-bodied people can't come to church. So when we think about this, it's about understanding difference and diversity. And diversity is all about intentionally including all people who are different or marginalized. So as I'm moving into the story of the great banquet, here's what I want us to sort of know and to center on it, that the banquet is most beautiful when different bodies and minds are invited to the table. I'm going to say that again because I'm a preacher. The banquet is most beautiful when different bodies and minds are invited to the table. So let's go to some scripture because you're going to say I didn't preach unless I read the scripture. This is Luke 14. Most of you, all of us should know this. You're all good Christians, so I'm not teaching you anything that you don't already know, right? It says, when Jesus noticed that all who had come to the dinner were trying to sit in the seats of honor near the head of the table, he gave them this advice. When you're invited to a wedding feast, don't sit at the seat in the seat of honor. What if someone who is more distinguished than you has also been invited? The host will come and say, give this person your seat, then you will be embarrassed. I love Jesus. And you will have to take whatever seat is left at the foot of the table. I like to describe this because we're coming up on Thanksgiving as you're coming home and you're sitting at the adult table and your parents come and tell you to go sit at the kids' table. Like we've all had that happen, right? You're in college and you're like, I'm 19, I'm grown, I'm sitting at the, and then they make you sit at the card table that has the Kool-Aid stains and you're sitting there with your 8-year-old niece who's picking her nose. And this is what Jesus is saying. When the banquet is done, don't assume that the seat of honor belongs to you. I want you to hold on to that thought. He says, because you don't want to be embarrassed when the host comes in and says, that's not really your place. Instead, take the lowest place at the foot of the table, and then when the host sees you, he will come and say, friend, we have a better place for you. Then you will be honored in front of all the guests. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled. How many of us have lived that? And those who humble themselves will be exalted. Next slide. Then he turned to his host. When you put on a luncheon or a banquet, this is important. He says, don't invite your friends, brothers, relatives, and rich neighbors, for they will invite you back, and that will be your only reward. So if you think about Jesus saying, this is how we build the table, this is how we build the church, I'm going to say something very stern. Stop building our churches with the people that we think can pay for it. Just going to let that marinate like a good steak. This is what Jesus is saying. He says your only reward is that you will only see the people who you thought could finance your ministry or your church or your organization, because those are the only people that you focused, and that's your only reward. That's as far as it's going to get. He says, instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Then at the resurrection of the righteous, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you Here's what I've said to pastors, and again, I get in a lot of trouble, but I've said this to pastors: you think your church is blessed. But what Jesus says is that if you focus on people with disabilities and those who are different, those who are marginalized, those who society has pushed off into the margins, if you invite them first and make them your priority, then God is on the hook for the payment. And I would rather God be responsible for financing the building of this table than the few able-bodied, ideal image people that we have assumed are the apex of the human experience to fund whatever it is that we're doing. He says God will reward you. I don't take that lightly. I trust that. So next slide. Here's what we learn from this banquet story. Number one, seats are a symbol of honor. Remember, he says don't come in and take the seat of honor because you might get embarrassed. Don't assume that the building of this table is done to prioritize you. The building of this banquet, Jesus says, is to prioritize the people who nobody is thinking about. And you don't want to be embarrassed when you go in and build this table and think that this is about us. This is about the able-bodied people or the ideal image people or the images that we've worshiped of what it means to be human and to be independent, and find out that this whole thing wasn't really about you at all. And so we also learn that they represent a power structure that exposes what we value and who determines that value. So you remember the story of the woman at the gate? Can I say this? One of the ways that we can begin to build an inclusive environment for those with disabilities, those who are different, those who are weird, those who are nerds, is to understand, watch this, that at some point in our life, self-included, we have operated as gatekeepers. And sometimes we create barriers to what we believe is the ideal because, like the woman, maybe we switched up the language, we moved the goal line, right? This is what it means to be human. This is what it means to be normal. This is what it means to be a member of this community. This is what it means to be Christian. And at some point, we all learn that maybe not for the entirety of our Christian life or our ministry, at some point, all of us have stood as gatekeepers and have been a barrier to people who are different from accessing this community. Here's what we also learned, that honor is the placing of weight. You learn that if you study Hebrew culture, right? It is to put weight on something, right? To say this deserves more. It's almost like if you've been to college, like if you ever had a weighted GPA or a weighted grade, you know that this is super important. This is what Jesus is saying about people who are disabled, people who are different, is that we have to honor them, put more weight on including them to the table. And I said this before, we also can kind of understand this if you do your homework, that the Western church has historically held this seat as it relates to defining value and importance. If we look back on the trajectory of the church, we will find that in a lot of ways, we have created images and idols of what it means to be a good church member, what it means to be a good Christian, what it means to be a part of this community. And a lot of times, those images and idols don't include people who are disabled, people who are different, people who are nerds, people who game. And we have had a huge influence on why some of those images and idols continue to persist in our culture. And if we think about it, that's why there's a such thing as the margin. Because the further away you get from this image and idol, the more and more you don't belong. Next slide, please. So the framing of disability inclusion and the inclusion of different people as a matter of diversity and subsequently justice is a part of setting the table. And again, I use that word justice because that's a buzzword now, right? And so I have to go into churches and say, this is just as much a part of doing justice, right? And we know this, like Micah says, is what does our God require of us, right? To walk humbly, to love the Lord, to do justice. I tell people, we might have some differences, of course, in our culture. People talk about the differences of justice. Is this justice, is that justice? But the one thing that we cannot deny is that the God of injustice does not exist. God calls us to use our resources and our influence to level the playing field as much as we possibly can. So setting the table also means intentional reseating or restructuring. He noticed that Jesus says, that's not your seat. Get up. Let's reorganize this. Here's what I love. If you read the next part of that section, Jesus actually goes in to tell a story about a guy who's having, so it's kind of weird, right? Jesus is at a dinner party and he's talking to the people at the dinner party. Then he goes on to tell a story about a dinner party. You remember this? And he says that the guy tells the servant to go out and the people decline. And he says, go out and invite the lame, the blind, the crippled, the poor. And then the guy goes out and does that. And here's what I tell pastors. Then he comes back after he invited the blind, the lame, the crippled, the poor, the different, the weird, the nerd, everybody who's different. And he comes back and tells his master, there's still room for more. Wow. Here's what I tell pastors. The reason why it is so difficult, and I have so many pastor friends, some of them pastor mega churches, and whenever we talk theology, we talk mission, we talk a lot of things. It's so hard to get them to have a conversation about disability or difference. And what I tell them is, and I'm kind of getting ahead of my slides here, but we'll get here, is it's because we built the church backwards. The servant says, I went out and prioritized all the people who society's placed on the margins, and guess what? There's still room for more. Here's what I tell pastors. If you prioritize this community, which by the way is one of the largest mission fields, both the gaming and nerd community and the disability community, if you prioritize that group, there's always room to do everything else you want to do in your church. But you got to start there. You remember the illustration, we all heard this, of the philosophy professor who goes into class and puts a jar and he puts the big rocks in, is this jar full? You remember this story? And everybody says yes. Then he puts in the pebbles. Is it full? Yeah, it looks pretty full. Then he puts in the sand and it kind of sifts down, and then he puts in the water. And the point is that he tells his class, if you put the important things in first, then you can put everything in first. And I say he stole that from Jesus. Right? Because this is what Jesus is saying. Start with this community and there's room to do everything else you want to do in your church. You're not going to miss anything. So the centering of the disabled and different voices is part of setting the table, and platforming disabled and different leaders. That's important. I always say you can tell an organization's commitment to diversity by who it allows to lead. If we want to set the table for people who are different, people who are disabled, part of that means giving them a seat of honor at the table that allows them to speak into the things that we may not be aware are barriers for them becoming a part of our community. One of the things that I did when I disclosed my diagnosis is it actually helped me find out that there are actually people in our church, some of them on my staff. At the time, I pastored a pretty large church for a small town, and I had a staff of 12, and I didn't know that some of them had disabilities. I had a staff member who had severe OCD. Sometimes was hospitalized for it. I had a staff member who had a severe anxiety disorder. I had a staff member who confessed she had lupus, and that's why some of the days that she was off is because she had a flare-up. Had elders who said, I have a daughter who's on the spectrum. And some of the people who we fuss about only come to church every 8 weeks, we found out the reason why. I like to say this. One of the things that we found out about David is when he went to fight Goliath, you remember this? He says, I've been fighting lions and bears. You remember that? And what I've often taught is that that's the first time that David has actually confessed that he's been fighting things in the background that nobody knew about. Wow. And it's the same for people with disabilities, with chronic illness, for people who are different. And I would train our church. We have people who we're trying to get to come through the doors who are fighting battles all week that you know nothing about. And the reason we need them at the table is so that they can help us to understand that these are some of the barriers that you created to us becoming a part of your community. These are some of the lions and bears we've been fighting, and if you want us to be a part of your community, here's how you can change things for the better so that we can be a part of this banquet that you're building. Next slide, please. So the inclusion, then we talk about disability, diversity, and justice. Inclusion is the intentional restructuring of society, right? We have a part to play in that. We're having a great conversation at our table, and I talk about some of the work, and I appreciate the conversation that you let us in on. And I was telling them I have a similar conversation with people in the disability community, because I don't know if many of us know this, the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, I think we just celebrated 30 years of that, and I was telling them at the table, most people don't know that churches and faith-based organizations are the only organizations that are exempt from having to legally accommodate people with disabilities. And the reason that is because they spent millions of dollars lobbying to say, we don't want to have to accommodate people with disabilities. And so the conversations that you have to have with people are the same conversations I have to have with the disability community, because we earned a bad reputation with them when we were willing to spend money to communicate that we didn't want them in our churches. That's the overlap that we have. We're having the same conversation because you're right, we earned that reputation. So that's why it's a part of helping to restructure society, social life, and culture. We owe it to the people who we have further disenfranchised. And I love the saying, it's not my fault, but it is my responsibility. I preached a sermon years ago from the book of Nehemiah and said that exact same thing, right? Nehemiah, he wasn't even born in Jerusalem. He had no idea what it looked like, but he said, you know what, it's not my fault, but it's going to be my responsibility to help rebuild it. So when we do this, it makes it possible for persons of all types to engage in the activities that are important and significant to their desired roles in participating in community with others. Notice the key overlap there, their desired roles. I'm a gamer, I'm a nerd, this is what I do. I want to continue to participate in your community in my desired role, right? And it's similar to people with disabilities, where we have to relinquish this need to try to change or fix them, either medically or whatever the case may be, in order for them to play a role in the community or the table that we're setting. Next slide, please. Now, the reason why this is important, if we want to talk practically, studies have shown that an increase in diversity actually increases group learning. Having people with disabilities, people with difference, people who are gamers, people who are nerds at the table actually increases group learning. Our churches will become smarter, will become more engaged, will become better missionaries, better evangelists by inviting people who are different. It increases group learning. Now this group, Bantle and Jackson was doing that with organizations, but this is true, right? This is what Jesus says. Prioritize this group. Put them at the table first. You'll have room to do everything else you want to do. Diverse teams or organizations benefit from a wide range of resources, ideas, and experience. I can't tell you how much, we had this conversation at the table, I can't tell you how much it improved. And I pastored 2 churches after my diagnosis, where I went in and did a lot of work to help the church become more disability inclusive. And I can't tell you how it just made the entire church better. Having better signage, teaching people. One of the things we talked about back there is that most churches have a part in their service, and it means a lot, right? Where in between songs, turn and greet your neighbor and hug them. And And so I did it like a survey in both churches that I pastored. And I found out that about 80% of the people who were coming late, you know the people that we fuss about? They're always late. They only come when the preaching starts. You know what I found out? They were coming late to miss that part of the service. You know why? Because many of those people had social anxiety, which is something that I have. Some of them were OCD. They didn't like force touch. There were a lot of things that we were doing that were forcing them to not participate in that part of the service. And while we were mad that they were coming late to preserve their mental health. But I didn't know that until I invited them to the table, gave them a seat of honor, and said, what are some of the barriers? And they said, that's why we come late, Pastor. It's not we're trying to be disrespectful. It is very hard. I'm like, I get that. I have social anxiety myself. The only reason I'm able to do church is because I'm the pastor. I know everything that's going to happen, right? So I kind of have an idea of like, okay, we're going to sing really loud for 12 minutes. And I put my headphones on and just deal with it. Non-diverse groups find it harder to keep learning because less and less unique information is being brought to the group. Dare I say, this is why a lot of our churches are dying. Because we're getting less and less unique information that helps us to keep our finger on the pulse of the people we say we're trying to, like it's only the church that, I shouldn't say only church, but this is what I do, so I'm critical sometimes. I found that we don't sometimes care about the very group, we don't care what the group that we're trying to reach thinks about us. If you go to a restaurant, they give you a receipt, how do we do? I was getting text messages in the back from my doctor's office. We want your feedback, right? It's only the church that would say, no, we do what we do, and we don't care what you think. And I think that's not something that Jesus taught. You remember Jesus sat around with his disciples and says, who do people say I am? I think we over-spiritualize that sometimes. I think he's just like, what's the word on the street? We got a little buzz, people following us on X, Instagram, hashtag fish and loaves. Right? We're doing our thing. What's the word on the street? What do people think about us? I talk about this in my book, Disability in the Church. One of the things that I had to come to grips with when I was processing my own diagnosis, I had to ask the question, what do people experience when they experience me? Because it wasn't what I thought it was. And then I had to go get help, and a clinical psychologist eventually diagnosed me and said, you're on the autism spectrum. But I said, that's a good spiritual question. What do people experience when they experience us? Because sometimes it's not what we think it is. Next slide, please. So I think I have a little bit of time, so I'm going to kind of speed through this. This is a great example of what it means to intentionally reseat. I'm going to just tell you, because you're good Christians and you read the Bible, to read this. This is from Galatians chapter 4, verse 12 through 16. I won't read it, but basically here's what Paul is saying. He's talking about how he landed in Galatia, and he talks about the fact that it was because he had a physical infirmity. And he later goes on to say, some of you were so kind that you would have given your eyes to me if you could, which is an indication that one of Paul's disabilities is that he had vision impairment, which is why he had a scribe. Some scholars think that that's what he's talking about in Corinthians. Others debate that, right? But we do know that Paul had a visual impairment because he said, y'all were so good to me that if you could, you would have given me your eyes. But then he goes on in this, and you can go to the next slide. He actually asked the people in Galatia to put themselves in his shoes. So we talk about intentional reseating. I think the very best place to start is to try to find a way to put ourselves in the shoes of the people who have often been marginalized, if not by the church, but by society. What is it like to be you? What is it like for you to try to engage in our community? What is it like to you to try to fight for a seat at the table? How difficult is it for you? What are some of the barriers? What are some of the things that we're doing that we could change? And there's a lot of things that I go in and consult with churches, even my own church, that I told them, you're just gonna have to stop doing that. Oh, well, that's what we do. Well, if you want these people to come, stop doing that. Is it that important that you're willing to risk an entire mission field because you want to do things the way that you've always done it? So I want to wrap up with this. We talk about intentional reseating. Invitation is sharing space, right? That's inviting people. But inclusion is helping them to help us to shape the space. Give them a seat of honor, like Jesus says. Put some weight on the words that they share with us about their experience, and then we get to work. People with disabilities and difference live in a world that is not built for them. And their education and experiences are a necessity in shaping the spaces that we share. Next slide. Now here, and I put a lot of stuff on the slides so you can take a picture, but these are all scriptures that kind of help us to see how people with disabilities or differences are actually at the center of God's agenda. Next slide. A good story to lean on too as you're thinking about recalibrating is a story of Mephibosheth. I always like, why? Like if you're looking to name your child, that's a good name. Very strong biblical name. An invitation to the king's table was a sign of high honor, but here's what I love about that story is that it resulted in dignity and influence. It wasn't just inviting him to have a seat at the table, because if you read the story, 35 other people were employed as a result of him being given a place. So not only did it give him dignity, it gave him influence. This is what we want people with disabilities and difference to have in our churches. Next slide. So let me conclude with this. The banquet is built by inviting and including the disabled and the marginalized first. Jesus is very clear. Invite these people first, and I promise you, you'll have room to do everything else. And God says that he will reward or he will bless you. He will repay you. You don't have to worry about trying to build a church using people who we have said are the ideal bodies and minds, and they're the apex of the human experience. So these are the people we want to pay for our church. Jesus is the exact opposite. Here's what I say in my book, and I say this to people in person. The seats of honor have been stolen, and we need to return them. We have prioritized the wrong group. We've sat in a seat that Jesus says doesn't belong to us. And in order for us to reach these communities, we need to vacate those seats and give them to the people who Jesus intended to have them. And I've said this before, we have built the church backwards. When disability, inclusion and difference, inclusion and belonging is a priority, there's always room for everything else. I promise you, you won't miss out on anything else if you prioritize the group that Jesus says to prioritize. Thank you.
Lamar, thank you so much. I don't know if you guys have you listened to a speaker or you've been in church and you just felt like there's a statement that was made and you're trying to catch your breath afterwards. Lamar, I had several statements during your talk that were just those type of statements where I just felt like I was trying to catch my breath afterwards. I have a dozen different questions. I'm sure there's some of you who may have questions as well. I'm going to ask the first one because I have the microphone and none of you do. And you're going to move that for us? Yeah. Okay, thank you. A lot of us in here are setting tables in unconventional spaces, right? We're not just setting tables in churches. We're setting tables in board game shops. We're setting tables at comic book shops. We're setting tables online, in live streams, things of that nature. Even in that, in unconventional spaces, this can be hard. I was talking with someone from our church the other day. We do a ton of encouragement. Get in the chat, say hello, we just want to welcome you. And someone who said, hey, Pastor, just so you know, I'm always in church, but the chat is overwhelming to me, so I don't say anything. And even in that, it was this moment where it's like, man, even in this space where I think that I'm creating a space that anybody can come and sit at this table, it can be hard. What are some of the things, as we're setting tables, that would be maybe the top 1 or 2 or 3 things that we should keep in mind when we're setting our tables to keep people who maybe don't look and think and act just the same as us, to make sure that they also have a space in what we're creating? If you were just to be like, hey, here are the couple things, just real practical things that we would take with us, what would those be?
Yeah, I would start with what you said, that the person said that this is overwhelming, and then acknowledge that, right? We talked about increased learning. One of the things that I had to do in both churches, and I know those are different spaces, is to acknowledge and admit, hey, the reason why we're not doing this, or the reason why this is not happening, and I should say that we created like high touch spaces, and COVID helped with that. You remember people started wearing like bracelets that said their level of, engagement. I'm okay with hugs, I'm not okay with hugs. But it's like first acknowledging that, and acknowledging that the learning that's taking place from the people that we're giving weight to, right? And say, hey, someone told me that the chat can sometimes be overwhelming, so we want to invite you, but by all means, don't feel the need to be overwhelmed by something, right? So you offer the space, but you also continue to talk about the learning that's taking place as you're giving weight and honor to the people who are giving you the feedback. And I had to do that a lot, right? Because a lot of our church is the same, right? 2 fast, 1 slow, and then the preaching and all these other things, and we had to change things, right? But I had to publicly acknowledge that I was learning from the people who were telling us that this is a barrier. And the reason why that is for part 2 is because that's a part of the essence of planting the seeds for changing the culture, right? As a leader, acknowledging that I'm learning, and as a church, we're learning, and we're giving a lot of weight to the people that we want to prioritize, and it encourages our congregation or the people that we're serving or ministering to also engage in learning. Because at the end, you don't want to be the only person who's championing this inclusion movement, right? We want it to be everybody who's in the seats. And so I had to do a lot of that and learning, telling people that I'm learning, this is what, we're not gonna do this anymore because this is a challenge for us. So I would say those are probably the 2 biggest things, especially because the spaces that we both serve are so different. So a lot of the concepts that I talked about, at least the abstract things, have to be translated into a totally different space, which also means that, it has to be like Paul. We have to have our fingers on the pulse of what our space looks like, and what do these things that I talked about look like in those spaces. Because I talk a lot about church, but that's what I do. So I would say that is at least the main thing.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably not one of us in the room who's in nerd ministry in one way or the other that does not or has not engaged with people who are neurodivergent in one way or another, right? Like that is just super commonplace. Like for all of, like we just know that, relate with people who are neurodivergent, create spaces for that. But man, in the backside of that, I'm a heavy strategy person, right? Like I want to have the best strategy. I want to have an effective strategy. I want to have that clearly communicated. The other side of that sword is that then people who don't fit within that strategy feel marginalized, disconnected, like they don't belong, and that they should feel guilty for not being able to fit into my strategy. Yeah. And that's a huge eye-opening thing for me, is this idea of giving permission to belong without participating in Mark's strategy. And that's a really unique thing and challenge I'm going to take away with me, that's going to change the way we think about the way we do things.
Yeah, can I say one more thing about that? And this is how I trained our staff. Like one of the things that, because there's a large part of me too that's like that, right? Like, because a large part of being on the spectrum is routine, and so I like things. But I realized, like, even with our children's ministry, when people are coming in, I talk about the families that come late. Most churches do this, so we have a cutoff time because we don't want to interrupt the learning. And so here's a question that I used to pose to our staff when we were trying to rethink things. And even if you went and talked to any of them at any church I pastored, they would tell you this question. I would always say, in the grand scheme of all things eternal, how big of a deal is this? Right? In the grand scheme of all things eternal. And so I would tell them, if a family comes 15 minutes late, you've already closed off. Again, they've been fighting lions and bears that you don't know anything about. They've been fighting with insurance companies all week, IEPs all week. They're fighting, trying to get medicine for their child, and they braved all of that to show up to church, and they're 15 minutes late. And I know we have a policy, but in the grand scheme of all things eternal, how big of a deal is that? And so that was the question that I always used to frame, because structure, there's some need for structure, but then there's some times where it's like, I don't know, that's really that big of a deal, especially if I want them to be part of this community.
I could keep talking to Lamar the whole time. So I am not, and I want to leave at least some opportunity. If there's a question out here you want to ask, Nate.
All right, so I'm 5 years into a church plant. We've made a seat at the table. We're having people that are involved and engaged and neurodivergent. And now I'm reaching a point where the question is, I've made the space. When do I empower and elevate and lift up those voices into positions of leadership to then do for others and to share that message?
Yeah.
So just let me, for the stream so they can hear, Nate asked, I'm 5 years into a church plant. I've created that seat. We have people who are in those seats. When's the next step? How do I take the next step of elevating those seats to places of leadership and influence within my organization?
Yeah, so here's what I would say. The first thing I had to think about is redefining what leadership means and looks like, and then discovering that there are different levels even within that, right? Because if we're talking about having them have a seat of honor and putting weight on their words and giving them influence, there's varying levels depending on various abilities, right? And for me, I think that's also a way of honoring neurodivergent people, because I'm not placing expectation of, again, this ideal understanding of what it means to be a leader or this image of what it means to be a leader. I'm honoring the gifts that they have. One of the things I talk about in my book, Disability in the Church, I talk about the parable of the sower. And we all know this. The last one that Jesus talks about is the seed hits the ground and the tree is growing, but there's no fruit. And so one of the things that I look at when it's time to elevate leaders is not so much what they do, but are there structures and ideals and things that we do that are proverbial thorns that are choking out the fruit that they could already be producing on a level that provides leadership to our church. Does that make sense? So then I'm not necessarily having to create positions. I'm looking at policy structures, things that we do, the way that we think, that might actually be blocking some of the very important influence that they could already have. And because that's organic, then I'm not having to really struggle with creating positions. And so when I say leadership, it's thinking from that perspective. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I find it'll be easier on you as a pastor and a leader, because you're not necessarily looking to a point. You're just looking for the fruit that already exists if we remove some of the barriers from them being able to be fruitful. Because that's one of the things that I believe all Christians, despite disability or difference or neurodivergence, we need an opportunity to be in a space where we can be fruitful. And to me, that's what the leadership looks like. It's just providing them opportunities and then pick the fruit and use it to influence the church. Yeah.
I'm just going to add one little thing there too. Sometimes it is just an invitation. The physical church that I served, one of our elders had an adult son with Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. And Jay had been at our church forever and loved our church. Loves our church. And Jay had never been invited to do anything, for the most part. Mm-hmm. Not anything, I don't want to be too critical, but not much. And one day I went up to his dad and just said, "What do you think about Jay joining our team and being a youth leader?" And to be honest, we had to do some work to level the playing field there, right? Like, yeah. Jay could not just jump in and lead a group of 7th grade boys. He wasn't ready for that. Yeah. But what we did do is we took somebody who graduated from the same high school as Jay and who he knew, who was a great leader and was able to invest in those boys and help them understand what it meant to relate to Jay and connect with Jay. And for the next 5 years, Jay invested time every single Tuesday night as a leader in our youth ministry with that small group of boys, watching them grow up and get ready to graduate, alongside of a co-leader, Matt, who helped him lead that group and led that group along with him. And Jay's not a youth leader there anymore. He still attends our church, but there's not a week that goes by that I'm not in church that Jay doesn't come up and hug me and talk about being a youth leader at New Life Students. That was monumental. It was huge. It was huge for Jay, but it wasn't just huge for Jay. Like, it wasn't a token thing. Like, it was huge for the boys who were in in that group to relate to Jay. It was huge for our youth ministry to serve alongside Jay. Like, all of us became better serving with Jay because he had a spot to step into leadership there, and we invited him in, not being 100% sure how that would have worked out.
Yeah.
I'm not here just to toot our own horn, because this isn't even Lux, right? This is the church that I was just a part of staff. I wasn't leading that church. But it was really cool to be part of that part of Jay's story and part of the church's story there.
Yeah, and I would say, accommodations, like being willing to make those accommodations as you're bringing those leaders up. One of the things I talk about, I think in my first book, and I preach about a lot, is that one of the first things that God did when he called Moses is to give him a divine accommodation. Moses says, I have a speech impediment, I don't speak well. And God didn't argue with him. He actually says, who makes man? I know you don't speak well, but I'm going to give you an accommodation. Here's Aaron. Because I still believe you can lead. You might need a little help. So here's Aaron to help you, but the calling is still on your life despite your disability.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know how to work. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm a youth pastor, and I had a student who, it's a spectrum, and he's on the very end of it. Extremely disruptive, screams in the middle of the message, everything. I don't know how to include him because nobody else in the room can get anything when he's in there. And my heart breaks for him, but I don't know what to do about it.
Oh, that's a really great question. So for the stream, the question was, I'm a youth pastor. I have a kid who's on the spectrum, very disruptive. We really can't effectively do much inside the room while he's in that room. How do I include him? Because I hear you, and I was a youth pastor for 6 years, and the tendency is just like, well, what can we do in another room with him so he doesn't have to be in this one, he doesn't have to be included in what's going on here? Because it's one thing to have you here with us, doctor, right? And it's another thing sometimes to have somebody who is in a very different space for you because it is a spectrum, and that can be exceedingly difficult inside of structured environments. So how do we engage with that? That's a really hard question.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I would first start by saying that don't feel the need to place that entire, I don't want to use the word burden, but I will, on your shoulders alone, right? So this is where we need community to help kind of progress into what it looks like for him to be included. So there are some situations where, and sometimes it feels like segregation, and so I don't want to say that, right? But there are some situations in which where it requires more to be able to include that person. I have always advocated for it, and again, I'm glad you said that because I always tell people, yes, I'm on the spectrum, but I acknowledge that me and your child may be different. I certainly have my challenges, but it's not that. So I don't want to ever, tell people that, oh, you can do anything because like I'm just one person. There's a saying, if you met one person with autism, you met one person with autism, right? I would start with the parents. I don't know how involved they are. Looking into other resources in the community. If you can, find out who are the teachers who work with him at school. What are some of the things that they have on the IEP that you might be able to translate into how you can help him best at church, right? Because those are already things that are in motion. And I've always advocated for, even at my own church, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to partner with other people who are doing this work and find out those resources and that wisdom and bring them in on this conversation. So if the parents are not that involved, maybe teachers, because I'm pretty sure that he has an IEP and there's specific things that are on that IEP that are to be done to help include him in school. I would try to tap into that. That's a little bit tricky because you have to navigate getting access to that. So that usually requires having a conversation with the parents. Are there people in your congregation who work with this population who may be able to volunteer and be a buddy. A lot of times it requires someone who's committed or a group of people who's committed to being able to give one-on-one attention and to try to be as consistent as possible with who those people are. And, you know, obviously I probably should have started with pray, but I assume that we all do that. But also know that it's a process. So the thing I want you to hear most is, because I hear your heart, is don't go at it alone. This is something that requires a village, and to be okay with, for the time being, providing accommodations for him that keeps him and others safe. Yeah. And that might mean he's a part of the activities for 15 minutes and then he goes off with his buddy or mentor or grown up and they do the lesson together and then he comes back. So really creative ways, but don't be afraid to work it as a process and try to progress. But also remember to keep him safe, to keep others safe in that process. Does that help?
Yeah, I really want to reiterate the idea of working with your school too. I think in the church world, we really get, I mean, I was a youth pastor. I wanted to reinvent the wheel of everything. It didn't feel like it was ministry unless I was doing something that I created from the ground up, right? It was, heaven forbid, I would borrow a lesson plan from somebody else. And it just seemed like sacrilege. We deal the same way with ministry and how we deal with people, but the educational system does not do that. And so like my wife's a preschool teacher. It is common for her to get on a call with a child she has in preschool who they know early on, parents identify, we know they're on the spectrum, and she's on a call with the teachers in the elementary school they're going to, the parents, and several other people who are surrounding this person to make a personalized plan for them to help them be successful. As a youth pastor, you should be talking to parents and trying to engage in that same conversation. What are all of the other things that we're creating around your child to help level the playing field, be accommodating, and help them to grow and to prosper and to flourish? Let's not just toss them into our environment, which is made to maybe do the exact opposite for them, whenever there's already resources available and handcrafted learning plans that have already been put in place to create helpful environments that are conducive to your child. Find ways to partner with the stuff that is already in existence. We don't have to always recreate that from the ground up. Listen, if you have more questions for Lamar, and you may and maybe likely do, stick around and chat with him.
Come see me, because I have something else I want to say.
Okay, come see him.
Yep.
And other than that, can we just give a thank you to Lamar for being willing to share with us? Thank you so much, Dr. Lamar. Appreciate you. Thank you. Listen, as we get ready and close this section of our day, I want to give you just a couple of little things as we're heading out. First one, there's construction in the castle and there's no water right now for 30 minutes. Not great. But there is water in the carriage house, and there is water in all of your lodges, and so if you need to use the restroom, please don't use the two right here for the time being. It will be back on soon. I apologize for that. The next thing is we have the next 2 hours-ish for a break to go to lunch. So if you want to stick around here, Carriage House has food. Go up and check out Gilded Greylands and their board game shop and hang out with them there. And when we come back at 2 o'clock, you will not be meeting here. You'll be going straight to your breakouts. Let me just tell you where those are, and then we'll get out of here. The Cedar Ridge Lower with Gilded Greylands, we are going to have a game showcase from 2 o'clock until 3:15. Go and check out one of the games that they'll be showcasing and shop in their store there. Cedar Ridge Upper, we're going to have redemptive innovations with Faith Tech. Where's our Faith Tech crew? And is there someone here from... Totally, they will be here. Yes, they'll be having something on redemptive innovations with Faith Tech. So if you want to come and check out them, Faith Tech is all across the country, but also all across the world. We got some great stuff going on there. In the Oaks Lodge, we have the Quest for Sustainability with John from Reliant. So come hang out with Reliant if you heard from him and you just, man, I want to learn a little bit more about how creating and cultivating sustainable ministry would work for me. And then in Glenview, all the way at the end, crafting your digital personal brand with Lauro. So Ryan, can you just stand up and listen? Right up there. He's in the back running all of our social media for the event, but also, man, he is just an absolute whiz in building your own personal brand. And so if you're like, I've been trying to figure out how to get into streaming or content creation, I can't really, how do I build the brand? What platform should I be on? Ryan's been doing this professionally for big companies for years and is also doing it on his own for his own personal brand inside of the Eve Online. Am I right about that? Did I just say totally? Eve Online? It's Eve Online. Inside of Eve Online, and he has some incredible insights if you're a creator in any fashion, so do not miss out on that breakout. The first ones, guys, will be back here at 2 o'clock in those lodges. I think that's on the back of, is it in your schedule too, on the back of your schedule? Yes, it should be there. If not, we'll totally post this in the Discord. And then the second one will be 3:45 until 5 o'clock. If you are part of the artist formerly known as God Squad XP Church meetup, it's going to be happening here in the lodge. We're going to be getting set up for that. And I think that's going to be starting right about 2 o'clock. And so come back here and hang out with us at 2 o'clock after lunch. If you're part of the XP family, we'd love to have you here with, I think we have Solux here, who's here with us as well, right? Yeah, so another XP staffer who's here with us as well. They're going to be hanging out here. That's going to do it for the first morning session, but certainly not the end of the day for Nerd Culture Ministry Summit 2024. Thank you guys so much for being here and joining us and hanging out with us. We'll see you in breakouts in a couple hours. Go have lunch. Take some